All right, welcome everyone. Call the meeting to order. I appreciate everyone being here. Sorry I'm late. The first item on the agenda is approval of agenda and prior meeting minutes. So, Mr. Beal, that would be.
Motion to approve, sir.
Good idea, okay. I'll second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Now report of the CEO, Brian Ingram. Legislative updates.
Well, we have pretty much have a budget, all but done. Doing a lot of analysis of that later as part of the Finance Committee, full board. They, with the single stream reduction, which is the biggest aspect of this, the version from a couple of days ago actually increased our reduction. So we're at 7.1 million for fiscal year 17-18, plus the IGT payment, which is another way that they've cut us. And then in 18-19, we're at 8.8 million and another 2.3 million for IGT. The total single stream for 2 years is just under 16 million. And when you add in the IGT, it comes up to almost 21 million. The only difference around the methodology, and again, you may recall last year, or for the last 2 years, the budget looked at the prorated single stream based on its distribution. This session and in this budget language, they're using a different methodology for that. It looks at available cash and something about reinvestment expenditures or plans that worked in our favor. But the total amount is, let's see, 80, do some quick math here, 86 million statewide first year and 90, I guess about 90 million second year. So another real bad budget. And the fact that, and you could laugh at this probably, the extent to which they've denoted some of it as recurring and some of it as non-recurring. I mean, those words, I think we've learned that they don't have the meaning that we would associate with the dictionary definition of recurring and non-recurring. How's that? The other thing about this that we understand is the way the recurring cut happens, it doubles up in the second year. At least that's our understanding at this point, if that makes sense to you. So you have the one recurring cut, it goes over to the next year, then you have the other recurring cut that sits on top of that. So in the second year, you have two recurring cuts. Does that make sense? This way I can describe it. So we'll be talking about that. Otherwise, the big news has been House Bill 403, which we've talked about last year, talked about this year. Senate Health Committee had a PCS, committee substitute. What's the P stand for? Proposed committee substitute, where they make a bunch of additions to it. There's copies of it over here. The testimony from that Senate Health Committee where they did that. They had a voice vote, which was pretty close. I listened to it on, they streamed the audio. I really couldn't tell if it was for or against, but usually that works in the favor of the chair. So that has some mighty big changes in it. Major changes to Medicaid transformation, you know, the dissolution of LME MCOs, things like that. That bill will then be heard in Senate rules, which could be, I'm sure I'll get a note once it's underway this afternoon, and then it would go to the floor, and then it'd go to the House. The House is, you know, adamant, and I think we sent out some of the media stories about, you know, that there's no way they're going to support it. But if you read the testimony from Senator Heiss, it's pretty alarming. And I would encourage everyone to read that, so I would copied it. So you don't have just me telling you, you can read it for yourself. It's almost a transcript of the meeting. Grossly inaccurate. But I'm not sure that it's so much about the facts right now as it is politics, in my view. So, not to be outdone, the House then this week, I guess House Health Committee took a Senate bill, removed the language, put in their version of HB 403 and passed it. And that goes to the Senate, and apparently they have to act on it within 2 days or something like that. So it's just a big political beach ball bouncing around right now. So much of this is caught up in sound bites about Cardinal, and that's where HB 403 in the House version really went to that, and then in Senator Heiss's version, he brought in a major change in Medicaid transformation, and all in the last 2 weeks of the session. So, you know, will either of these bills go anywhere? You know, hard to say. A lot of reason to just say no. You know, they're very intent on getting out by July 4th. They've got the budget done. Just, you know, some cleanup now.
Of course, the governor will veto it, but it'll be overrode in about 8 minutes. Just like the budget, you're gonna veto the budget, but it'll be overrode in 8 minutes too.
So we're you know, really in the last probably week and a half of the session. And, you know, to be making big changes to, you know, Medicaid transformation legislation, which was an enormous piece of legislation in the last week of a session, and to do that in conference committee, well, you decide how sound that is from a public policy perspective. But that would be an even, you know, I spoke to members on that Senate Health Committee that voted in favor of it, you know, thinking, well, I'm just going to do that to let it move along and we'll fix it in conference committee, whatever fixing it means. So, like I said, this isn't about so much about policy as it is about politics right now. That's what I got for you.
Ron, you got anything to add or any questions?
I mean, yeah, I think everybody that I've talked to, certainly in the association, that, you know, that they know something was coming from Heights, but they didn't know it was going to be to this extent. You know, they've been keeping on the Medicaid stuff for a long time, but when you go and then you put out there on the limb, like he did, what did he say, that 2 were going to fail and 3 were going to fail?
Yeah, apparently no one was listening when he said 2 were going to fail, so he upped the 8 to 3.
Yeah, and with no evidence of that,
Right.
that was submitted,
2 or 3.
because we asked about that.
Yeah.
Because that's a huge thing. I mean, to say that and know that 2 out of the, that's what, if 3's going to fail, isn't that close to 50%?
Yeah.
I mean, And to say that and with no evidence of that, and, but no evidence presented here, and I asked Davis, I said, was any evidence presented? No.
Well, it wasn't, they didn't caucus on it, it just came out. I mean, somebody, a committee member, sent me the PCS the night before. It was the first time I'd seen it,
I don't,
the night before.
I don't know. I guess, but it's all triggered by when they read that audit from, and the word got around about Cardinal, it just lit everybody's fuse. And so that's, like Brian said, they say that shiny object, but that's what brought them to that shiny object.
Why not just deal with Cardinal?
Well, that's been an argument all along. I mean, if there's somebody else, and I don't know if you read, you know what, I'll bring it from Tree, what,
Lisa,
Lisa's response. Did you read her response? If you get to navigate my phone, she had a great response to them too. But to get back, especially in the rural counties, I mean, this, in 18 months, are you kidding me? And to provide, and what you see when they see people like this float, people with good ones like we have here, good people around this table right now, you think they ain't said, well, hey, providers,
Right.
and good providers, you know, well, I don't, it's not good, this ain't the way to go about anything.
not much support in the Senate really for it, from all indications. House is dead set against it, so, you know, it's not like there's really any belief it's gonna go anywhere, but it's such a, I mean, again, I would just, you really should read the transcript. So I don't wanna be telling you what somebody said, you can read it for yourself.
Okay. Anything else?
About it.
Okay. All right. The next item is closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143, 318, 11A1, in order to prevent disclosure of competitive health care information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 122C, 126.1, or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes, and to consult with attorneys pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143, 318, 11A3.
Motion move to go into closed session as described.
I'll second it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Call meeting to order?
Call meeting to order of the, let's see, if I can get this one.
We call it the RC Cola meeting?
RCTC
That's right.
Committee of the Board. Welcome, everybody. Doug Kennedy will not be here today, and I'll do the meeting for him instead. I don't speak very loud, so if you don't hear me, tell me to speak up from time to time. Or get a couple of these, which are pretty cool. I can hear all kinds of stuff with this. Okay. First is the approval of the agenda. Do we have any corrections, additions, or suggestions about the agenda? I have a motion, we approve them as circulated.
I'll make a motion, I'll second it, whatever you need.
And I'll do the same.
All in favor, aye?
I think it's just the three of us, right?
And Pam just arrived, so you've got 4.
Oh, there she is.
So, next is approval of the minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review those as were circulated? If so, are there any corrections or additions to the minutes?
I didn't see.
Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion, we approve the
Any
minutes.
second
Second. Okay.
discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, let's It looks to me like we're going to have a fairly thick agenda today, so let's move straight ahead, Tracy.
All right. First, I wanted to introduce one person to the committee, Marvin Sanders, who is our Risk and Regulatory Affairs Director. I know y'all are used to seeing most of the rest of the faces, and with him is Heather Boyd, who is a Regulatory Compliance Specialist. Marvin supervises Andrea. I know y'all are used to seeing Andrea every month. Andrea's on vacation this month. We decided to let her take a break. So Marvin and Heather are here. I think Yvonne also knows Marvin, but Marvin was with the State of North Carolina Division of Mental Health and then the Secretary's Office for many years, and last served as the Risk Management Director for the TCLI program at the state level. So we were very excited to recruit Marvin away from the state. That's good. The first thing on the agenda, wanted to let you all know about a case. You have in your packet a press release from the United States Department of Justice about a school counselor. It says, it's dated June the 7th. It says, school counselor pleads guilty to healthcare fraud scheme. Wanted you all to know that that case actually came from a referral from Vaya, from our Special Investigations Unit, several years ago. And it was, we discovered the fraud through, I believe, some data mining and other claims review of claims activity. Brandy Lamb, who's our SIU director, actually attended the court hearing, so I thought y'all might be interested for just 2 or 3 minutes for her to share with you how that went.
Well, good things come to those who wait. That's the theme of this. I believe it was January of 2014, we had gotten a referral, and actually, Tracy, in addition to data mining, an explanation of benefits survey. We send those out monthly. A parent actually had called in to indicate, my daughter does not receive services from this provider, so in addition to that, we did data mining, and we determined that he was seeing an extremely high number of members, and from there, we just took the ball and ran with it and sent the referral to DMA. MID accepted the case, they're the state level, and took them several years of investigating, and turned out that they substantiated what we were thinking all along, that he had been fraudulently submitting claims on children from the school. A lot of them is where he had gotten their dates of birth and found a way to get their Medicaid ID numbers and their sibling members, and in some cases their parents as well. So he had generated 170 plus fake member records, which of course he didn't even keep records because they were real clients, but they substantiated it, and I was able to attend the hearing in the federal courthouse in Asheville, and he pled guilty to the count of healthcare fraud, and he will pay restitution for about $436,000. So that was extremely, I was extremely glad and grateful to see that justice has been served, and it was a neat experience. I should say neat, but unfortunate for him, but he pled guilty. I guess he had given them no problems whatsoever. He realized, once he had started to be interviewed by MID, his gig was up. So at any rate, it was a nice experience to be able to see that from start to finish.
Well, Brandy's being a little modest. The investigators and the U.S. attorney, MID attorney who worked on the case were very complimentary of Vaya's efforts and said that, without our sort of detailed documentation and referral, that really helped them in being able to make this case. So we are pretty proud of this result and wanted you all to know, kind of see a real life result of one of these types of fraud cases. And the $430-something thousand that Randy referred to, those are all claims that were paid by Vaya. And so we are in the process of completing a victim restitution form with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we will be officially listed as the victim for purposes of any restitution that he makes.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm glad he's paid the money back. But I know consumers that have went to jail for stealing a hot dog.
He has not been sentenced yet. So he pled guilty. He is out on bond, and his sentencing hearing, we're not sure when that will be scheduled, but he could potentially serve up to 10 years in prison.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay,
Nice
thank you,
work,
Brandon.
Brandy.
Thank you. I'll pass that along to the team who did all that.
And I'm sure that this has been circulated to the provider network.
What was the
No,
question?
I said this
it
has
should
been
be.
circulated to the provider network.
Not yet, we're saving it, we have to do, training for our provider network on fraud and abuse.
Sure.
And we're actually doing that on June 30th, next Friday, is that
Yes.
right, next Friday? So we thought we would present this as a case study at that training, so that's why we haven't sent it out to them yet.
Sure.
But yeah,
Maybe you could come to the next pack and present it?
or Brandy could, yes,
Or
absolutely.
you did it?
We can absolutely do that. It's an interesting case, because Brandy learned a lot, not only was he getting it from the school, he was apparently also a volunteer soccer coach.
Soccer coach.
And was getting
Just a-
information that way too. And the
Upstate
grocery store
as
equal
well.
opportunity offender. So,
It's pretty sad.
yeah. Okay. The next item is your legal and compliance quarterly report. I did not plan to go through every page of this, really more hit the highlights and then entertain questions from any of you who've had a chance to look at it. This kind of follows the same outline as the previous quarterly report that we presented, so this is the second time we've done this. We've got measures about contracts, the incident response team, from the Investigation Oversight Committee, the Contract Performance Unit, Special Investigations Unit, reconsiderations, litigation, privacy and security, ethics point, etc. Heather Boyd deserves the lion's share of the credit for pulling all of this together. So the contracts team, this just kind of generally shows you the volume of contracts that Vaya is processing, and you can see we've got our annual numbers so far for the last year. I'm going to kind of skip over those unless anybody had any specific questions about the contracts measures.
I did look at all those charts,
Okay.
Chris, but I didn't have any questions.
Okay. The next section is contract performance and special investigations. And you'll see some of the metrics from the incident report team. I have all the experts here in the room with me if you all have questions. You can see, for example, on slide 15, the top 10 services with the highest number of incidents in the past 12 months. Slide 14 describes the different types of incidents.
Mine not numbered.
Yours are not numbered, I am sorry. Slide 14 is the one that says incident report team at the top, and it describes the level 1, level 2, and level 3 incidents.
She went beyond
Maybe-
that.
I may be on the other.
Okay, you went fast.
Sorry.
Does it not look like they're kind of trending slightly up?
Patty? That is what the graph shows, is that they do appear to be trending slightly up since November, they've been increasing.
And there have been some efforts around training. There's always been the thought that many incidents don't go reported, so there's been a lot of effort both at the state level and within Vaya to do training. So we're seeing an increase in the number of reports that we're receiving.
It's
We
not
are pretty confident that there are incidents not being reported, because we often learn about incidents through the news. And then we contact the provider to say, hey, we're reading about one of our members in the newspaper, but we can't find where you have reported this as an incident in IRIS. So there's still a lot of work to be done with providers on that. Investigation Oversight Committee. These are some fairly new metrics for you all. So this is the committee that is reviewing all of the complaints and grievances that come in regarding providers in our network. And they're looking at trend analysis, they're assigning those complaints for investigation and then following up on those investigations. So you can see the number of referrals per month in a 12-month period from January 16 to January 17. And then you can see the complaint type, which is the next slide, which kind of breaks it down into various categories. The highest is program or billing abuse. This is where we think that there are services that shouldn't have been billed for, but it doesn't appear to be fraud. Clinical issues, Contract compliance, meaning they may be out of compliance with some provision of their contract. Documentation issues, health and safety issues, suspected fraud, trends, unethical business practices, and waste. So those are some examples of the categories. Did you have any questions?
The data on the first investigation oversight committee is just up through January of 17. So where's that data coming from? It's so far behind.
Patty, this is at slide 19.
It's from our investigation oversight committee. In order to prepare, so it's internal data, that's where it's coming from. But in order to prepare it in time to get this out to the board so that you have review time, we're a quarter behind.
So we're actually a month from the next quarter.
Yeah.
So, okay, I see.
Then you can see, we move into the contract performance unit, and this is the unit that does the routine monitoring. One change that Jeannie may be aware of is that the state has eliminated the routine monitoring requirement. However, they have not eliminated the post-payment review requirement. So we will still be conducting post-payment reviews of providers, but we will not be using the routine monitoring tool. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we won't be reviewing providers. We conduct a lot of reviews that are outside of that routine monitoring. We do focus monitorings and we do complaint investigations. Then we move into the special investigations unit, and unless y'all have any questions, I'm going to draw your attention to the slide that has overpayment dispositions from 2013 to the present. It's the slide with the blue graph and the little green boxes. It's right before the health records slide. Yep, you got it. And we've been working really hard to try and gather and track this information. So did Angela pull this together? Yeah. So this is trying to show you what happens after we've identified an overpayment and how much of it we've been able to collect, either because the provider paid it in full, or we recouped it from their claims, or we entered into a settlement with them for them to pay some portion of the amount owed. So you can see some figures there.
A lot of money.
It's a lot of money. So then we moved in, these are just kind of the monthly figures on our record requests. And again, slide 34, this last quarter, these are the concealed carry handgun permits, which is always interesting, but you can see how that is trending up every year. And this is an unfunded mandate from DHHS. There's no funding given to us to perform this, even though the statute requires that we do it. So these are the Sheriff's Department send us the concealed carry applications and a release of authorization form, and we are checking our records to determine if the individual had received any mental health services or inpatient hospitalization that would prevent them from being potentially eligible for a concealed carry permit.
We've seen this before,
Yeah.
but as always, not all the counties are on there. Does that mean they're not issuing any permits, or you're not involved, or what's happening there?
I'm trying to remember the number, but there are a number of counties that do not send the forms to us.
And the ones that aren't listed are those counties.
The conversion of paper.
They just not work well with Vaya, or they lazy, or not know they're supposed to, or what's the deal? Or are they supposed to, or
The
this is just...
statute requires them to conduct the check, but they may be conducting it in some other manner, and we don't know. So,
The conversion from paper records is to microfilm or what? Or-
scan, and that's only for medical records. We have completed, I think we only have a very minor amount of conversion of the paper medical records to electronic. A lot of that was New River, so for those of you who were around when the whole New River happened, there were hundreds, thousands of boxes that had to be scanned and organized, so we worked with an outside vendor to do that. Remaining records are in paper, are mostly human resource and finance records. Under North Carolina law, we're required to keep HR records for 30 years, which is a lengthy period of time. Board
Worse than
record,
medical records.
the retention period?
Yes.
The retention period depends on the funding source, so I'd have to pull up my document to
Okay,
answer that.
but your medical records are only, 12 years after adulthood and otherwise 15 or something.
A little short on that, but yes, and
Yeah,
so
it's-
we don't have to keep them as long as the HR records.
Incredible.
Yeah. Board records are considered permanent historical records that we are not permitted to destroy in any way. And we cannot scan them, so we maintain them in paper. And we can convert them to microfiche, but we have not gone down that path. We're still sort of, I've inherited board records from 7 different LMEs. So we're engaged in a process of organizing those. One of the things that y'all may find interesting, we found records dating back to the very first meeting of what was called the Asheville Mental Hygiene Clinic, which was the predecessor to Blue Ridge, and they date back to 1948. So I'm actually in discussions with the School of Government. They might be interested in keeping them as a permanent part of their collection.
That's awesome.
Policies. So I think I mentioned to you all before that we maintain our policies through an electronic policy platform. And Heather is also my amazing point person on that and does really great work keeping me on task. We have gone down from 330 policies when they were initially loaded. We're at 170 something, Heather?
About 172.
We're continuing to work on refining and shrinking those, and it's a lot of policies to maintain. Privacy and security. You look at the reported internal incidents through May 2017. Where it refers to the 4 that were remaining open, those were malware incidents where we had malware intrusions, all of which were contained, and we're working with an outside vendor to close those out. Ethics point, which is slide 43. I know you don't have numbers. It's the one with the circle and the blue shaded area. That's our new system that we implemented. Heather, when did we implement that?
I would say it was mid-November,
Mid-November.
2016.
Thank you. And Ethics Point is our internal system for people to report incidents, complaints, whether it's about providers, Vaya staff, HR issues, injuries. It's also available on our website for external members, families, providers, and it has an anonymous reporting option to allow people to report anonymously. We've been very pleased with it so far, and we're starting to see some really good results in terms of the types of issues that are being reported.
Is that an internal developed or is that a purchase?
It's a purchase. It's a company. It's the same company that does our policy tech. It's Navex Global, and they also manage our 24/7 hotline. I think they're pretty. There's like 5 or 6 vendors that do this nationally, and they're one of the big ones. I'm guessing Pam has heard of them. DHHS Communications. These are really Marvin's metrics. He is our chief liaison with DHHS in terms of data requests, requests for information, asking us to resolve issues with members or providers who have called the state. And so these are just some metrics showing how many of those we receive. External audit status. Let's see. We completed our URAC reaccreditation. We had a surprise, what did they call that? A URAC?
URAC monitoring.
A URAC monitoring review. It happened, they do those on a spot check basis. It happened to be the same week that all our documents were due for the EQR. And so the team did a great job of handling both of those at the same time. And the reviewer appeared to be impressed with our operations and said we clearly had a quality system in place, so we are not expecting any negative findings from your act. And then the external quality review, we have submitted all the documents for that, and the on-site will be July 19th and 20th. And then the final slides just give you some data points on reconsiderations, both member and provider, and litigation. So, if you don't have any questions,
That was amazing.
please don't thank me, please thank Heather.
It's a lot of that. Now, is this a monthly collection or quarterly
Quarterly.
collection? Quarterly.
That's a quarterly collection, we're gonna try and bring that to you quarterly. And any feedback, if you'd like to give us on, like to see more of this, less of this, just let us know. We're really trying to develop and refine this.
I thought the majority of it was easy to interpret, just by looking at it. But I didn't know what to ask.
Thank you. The next item is the regulatory compliance update, which is where I get to tell you about all our exciting negotiations with DHHS around our contracts. We finally received, there's no data for this, just me sharing with you. We finally received our DMA contract 2 days ago. It's a 184-page contract. We have until Friday to read it and sign it. So when providers get upset with me about how they get 30 days to read their 40-page contract, that's kind of my response. We're looking at that. We've had several negotiation sessions with DMH around our Division of Mental Health contract. Primary issue is around funding to perform the administrative services that they're asking us to perform, and they are proposing penalties for the first time for a failure to meet 3 separate benchmarks. The 2 of the benchmarks have to do with follow-up after discharge, and the 3rd benchmark relates to TCLI. And those penalties would go into effect starting January 1st, 2017. On the DMA side, it's $100,000 per month for each benchmark not met. And on the DMH side, it's $50,000 per month for each benchmark not met. So there's been a lot of discussion around what that's going to mean, how they're going to gather the data, how they're going to compare it equally across all LME MCOs, et cetera. I think Stephen participated in a lengthy call yesterday with all the quality management directors around this particular issue.
So the 50,000, would that be the TCLI or would that be?
For each of the 3 metrics, it's follow-up after discharge, MH, and follow-up after discharge, SUD, and then the 3rd metric is TCLI, the housing piece.
And then there's another one so they're each, DMA is all the Medicaid side, DMH is all the state funded side, DMH, instead of doing the TCLI, DMH is doing the percentage of individuals that received a primary care or preventative care visit that are in the innovations program.
So the
that's-
follow-up after is the Medicaid piece?
I'm sorry?
The follow-up
It's
after
both.
discharge is the
It's
Medicaid?
both.
Medicaid and state
Medicaid
funded.
and state.
Okay. For any SA or SU or MI
It's
service?
inpatient and facility-based crisis and detox.
That would be another one, Jeannie, if you'd like Stephen to come present that to the PAC at a future meeting, we can certainly do that.
So.
But it's not final yet, we're
Yeah, it's
still
still
negotiating.
I think that showed up in provider contracts this last time. One of the issues that we have, of course, with the facility-based crisis is we're not always the provider that they're discharged to. So, kind of, how are you going to measure that? So, we don't have any control over what the other provider does from the standpoint of follow-up.
Right.
Well, we are familiar with that phenomenon. They're not measures that we're being penalized on, but they've included a large number of measures around physical health care that we as the LME MCOs don't have any ability to change necessarily.
Does that penalty come out of your administrative money? or
Well,
they
that's
take it-
been part of the discussion, is where is that
They're
money
gonna
going to
penalize the
come from?
recipients of the service for.
That's part of the discussion, is where's the money gonna come from? And is it really just gonna hurt the system and take money out of services?
Right.
Where's it go when you send it to them? I mean, is it gonna go help any other consumers, or is it doubtful?
That's one of the questions that all of the LMEMCOs have asked. So we are continuing to engage in negotiations with them on that point. We're also continuing to negotiate our subsidy administration contract with them. This is a contract for us to perform the TCLI subsidy administration functions. So those are the three major contracts that we're working on with them right now. Carmen, have I missed anything?
So I did a little quick math, and I noted that in order to complete the packet, we have to do only 10 pages per minute. So
I'm done.
We're essentially on schedule.
All right.
And not to put any pressure on anybody, but Steve, go ahead.
Good job.
So next we have
The next 5 we can't read, so.
There's another set of it in the back of the packet that's a little easier to read. But it also is found in the core measure set. That core measure set, nothing's out of compliance on this core measure set based on the monthly report. I think we did meet all of our standards for this report. I did want to make note of some things that we talked about last time that we had questions about. So there was an increase in claims in February, March, and April, and that also continues through May. That increase, we don't really have a significant reason why there's such an increase, but we do know that the increase in the later months are due to the end of the fiscal year. The providers are trying to get everything done before the fiscal year, so we're seeing an influx of claim submissions as of late. Regarding the number of authorizations, if you recall, in February, it jumped significantly. Those numbers have came back down to our average, around our normal average per month. We're contributing the increase in March due to from February, since February is a short month.
What slide number you're on, so the slide number is?
Sorry,
Is it
I'm just
slide-
kind of going over an overview. The auths are on slide
These pages are numbered.
11.
These are numbered.
Slide 11 has the auths.
Okay.
And you see that big spike in the blue line in March.
Right.
And so that's what we're referencing here. You see February has a slight downward trend, and then March kind of shoots through the roof, and then it's coming back to normal. We have data regarding May as well that it's not in this packet because we just got it, but it's kind of leveling out as a normal average. So that March blip is kind of a anomaly. We don't expect to see that trend going forward. And then you also notice, I'm just giving the highlights, you'll see an increase in grievances in March, and that's due to the resource allocation letters that we talked about in here quite a bit. They're causing a lot of problems. They're state issued, and we have to send out exactly what comes out of that letter, and people are calling and upset about that letter. So those are the pieces that I had for the core measure set. Is there any other questions that I can answer?
On these ugly graphs, the first page, talking about the number of persons on the IDD wait list, between January and February, it dropped by like 170, dropped by 10%. Was that because?
I can actually answer that.
Go for it.
I think I can anyway, you can tell me if I'm wrong.
We'll see.
But they have a project they've been working on, where they're contacting all those folks, and they can't find some of them, they're,
Oh, the list was purged, perhaps.
They're trying to, so some of these people, a long time ago, people were just added to the list. You could just call up and say, hey, I want to be on this list.
Okay,
And so with no documentation or understanding or anything.
very good. That's a
And so
special
we're-
intervention, so that makes
and they're
sense.
getting some of them community navigator and.
And then about 4 or 5 pages later, there's the estimated number of uninsured in the catchment area, and obviously it comes from outside, and it dropped from 167 to 138 for the July number. Is that
Right.
from the state?
The state defines that number and
Yeah.
gives this to us at the start of each fiscal year.
Okay,
So
so
that's state defined.
because that really helps our numbers look better, and, you know, our penetration improved by like 20% in one day.
It did.
Okay, all right.
I have a question too about, it's on page 23, and I just would be interested in your comments of how there's so much variation in mental health admissions per thousand, non-Medicaid, even the discrepancies across the regions. Is that still, I mean, this has come up before, but is that still a difference in how the data is collected? Or is that coming off a common database that we have, we can,
So this measure is coming from each individual MCO reporting it. So it could be that variance. It also could be the setting or the county that it's coming from, or the MCO, based on how many people live in a given area in that catchment.
but it's not based on total numbers, it's based on admits per 1,000,
Right. Yes.
you know.
$1,000 per, I'm sorry, yes,
Mhm.
you're right.
So there's no sort of explanation, what's the variation of that?
The reason for that variance?
I mean, I would think that if you're partners, you'd really want to talk to Sand Hills, or, you know, East Point, or, you know,
Could I
Sand Hills in
say something
particular.
about partners?
Sure.
In regards to partners, it certainly may not speak to all of them, but partners has two things, that they consistently have a much higher community hospitalization rate, because one, they have the highest number of hospitals located within the catchment area, and they also receive the highest percentage of freeway inpatient dollars, which is state-funded. It's a contract between the state, the hospital, and the LME. And those are CAS dollars, so people from other catchment areas go to those hospitals and use those dollars. So it really pushes their numbers up.
That's interesting. I mean, it does speak then for the need for more available inpatient beds,
Yeah, spread across the state. Yeah.
this, across the state.
Right.
And it means that there may be some significant numbers of people who don't receive the necessary services also across the state.
I do want to note that this is based on November data for the comparison, so we don't have the most up. The state gives us the comparison data, so we don't have anything more recent than that.
And that data isn't reported cumulatively for the year.
This is reported per month, so this is just November.
But I mean, it would be more meaningful too if they would report it, the annual or cumulative SD or whatever. Just interested.
It'd also be helpful if they send us some more recent numbers.
That's true.
Steve, want to shift gears a little bit? I think on page 30, we have the ED readmits. As a percent of total admits, we're running about 12%. And I guess this was August data last year.
Yep.
But still, the next page, the next page has active admits as a percent of total. And the active admits are the ones who are in a relationship with a provider.
Yes.
And it's higher.
Yes.
I couldn't get my head around that.
So
You'd think if they were in an active relationship with a provider, they would have a lower risk of being readmitted.
So it's interesting because the active is active within 90 days, which is a long period of time to be, like, so if I had a service 90 days ago, or 89 days ago, I'm still linked to that.
Oh, this is a 30-day readmit.
Right.
Okay, that makes good sense. Okay, thank you. On page 35, it's a measure of percentage of funded positions for the transition for TCLI. Who determines how many funded positions there are?
We're given, just help me out for a moment, we're given a set number of FTEs for our TCLI, and we have to have so many, we have to have at least 80% of those positions filled.
We're given an allocation that specifies a certain number of FTEs.
From the
state.
Thank you.
And then I didn't really go over a lot of TCLI information here. Heather in the next portion is gonna talk a lot about the TCLI data. So I kind of glanced over that.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for Steve? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A lot of work, appreciate it. Heather?
So the regulatory compliance log, formerly known as the performance improvement grid, and this is where we document areas that are out of compliance. And we keep these areas on this report for 3 reporting cycles. So some reports are, some measures are reported quarterly or annually, and some are reported monthly. So that's how we track these. And my apologies, when this was all mailed out to you all, some of the data was incorrect regarding TCL, and so we have updated that data, and it is current on this report that you all have in your packets today. So I apologize about that. A couple areas to note for.
Heather, one second.
Sure.
Dr. Khan, did you bring your packet with
I
you?
brought mine, so.
All right.
Yeah, I did too.
I did too. Are there other packets somewhere?
Stephen, you can.
Right here on the thing right there.
Great. Thank you.
It's the stapled one in the small packet, or in the small binder.
Go ahead.
And it, well, yeah.
That's really
And that's the stapled version, it's in the small.
I'll have 3.1, trying to look at this. Well, I did early, I didn't get home, get through it before it's 11 o'clock.
Go ahead, please.
Well, I don't think it's packet.
I just have to catch up on you. Heather?
This one's,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I thought you were asking for us over there. Okay, so we keep the areas on here for 3 reporting cycles until they positively, we need 3 reporting cycles of positively trending up, meeting that standard, and then they would come off. So you may see some items on here from month to month, since this is going to be reported out in our CQC every month. Some noteworthy items are the access to care standards and the consumer data warehouse standard. We were able to meet those standards this month, this reporting cycle. There are 6 measures total, and so for the rest of the measures, we did not, for that reporting cycle, meet the standards, so they're staying on this report. And we will have 4th quarter data in August when we report out, and we're hoping to see some improvement in some of these areas due to all of the initiatives that we're implementing, especially in TCL. The provider survey and the perception of care surveys, those are administered annually, so we won't have any current data for you all until probably next fall or winter. So that may come off of this report, and we'll bring it back at that time if there's any areas that require improvement. The perception of care is being administered currently.
we just finished it on Friday.
So it takes them a good few months to pull that data together and get the state report out to us. And then the provider survey is administered usually in August, September timeframes. And then that's another 3 or 4 months post-administration that we'll receive that data. So those are sort of the highlights. I just didn't know if y'all had any questions.
Seems like, and I don't know, I haven't had a chance to look at the new data, but it seemed like some of the data for TCLI was kind of low for the last month that we had data in this other report. Looks like number of new individuals, priority populations.
I'm sorry, I thought
That's
which one?
slide 20.
Slide 20, thank you.
And it just seemed like several of them were kind of low, but why would you think we're not doing what we need to be doing there? Or, I mean, I believe we're trying to do what we need to be doing, but why would you think our numbers are low? That's not
I'm going to defer to my colleagues to answer that.
And I'm gonna jump in and say, Pat, we Vaya, we recognize that we have some room for an improvement. And Stephen and I were just talking earlier that his team, which is the quality improvement team, includes, will be developing a QIP, a quality improvement plan project, whichever P word you want to use, to look at improving these. This is a really critical area for the people that we serve, and so it will be.
So it's important to do it right, I
Yes.
get that. I guess my question too, when we just talked about $50,000 and $100,000 paybacks, if we were in that situation right now, what kind of money would we be paying back?
That I don't have an answer for.
So,
It would be the 50,000.
Do what?
It would be the 50,000.
and that's off a measure, that's page
Is that paid back a month?
12.
Is it for every month that you're out of program?
There is a certain ebb and flow with the TCLI. We met this morning, Christina, and they're expecting a very good month this month. I do want to let you know that we're having some changes in TCLI, so my expectation would be that we would have a little difficulty meeting numbers until we get back on track, until we get some different systems in place. But we, as an organization, are meeting to make sure that we have the right people in place and that we're doing the right things to ensure that we meet these numbers in the future.
And you had a new provider coming on board in April, so is that correct? And so,
And that would impact,
good or bad, or?
it will improve the support employment measure, page 20.
I was particularly impressed with the one that said that the process of developing things whose master leasing of actual units can be pre-rented and held for quick occupancy. Whose brilliant idea was that? That's great. Because I think, wasn't that a lot to get people, you have to negotiate with the landlord and everything, and that delays the transition. So,
Unfortunately, we didn't come up with it. It is something that occurs nationally in different places. And the individual that the state has hired to head up the housing was previously in Phoenix. And she had a large master lease program there. That's one of the reasons that the state hired her. And so our staff are working with Jessa Johnson to make sure that we are one of the only MCOs that has the opportunity to do that.
great, great.
So could you talk a little bit about how the reorganization that's currently going on and proposed fiscal year 17-18 budget will impact your areas of responsibility and how we might see differences in your reports going forward in terms of meeting certain standards or being challenged to meet those standards?
In terms of the compliance and the quality departments themselves?
I'm interested from a compliance standpoint as well, but also the regulatory and the quality
Sure.
and the reporting that we just heard about.
Yeah, there were no reductions in the compliance staff. In fact, we added one additional position there to deal with the volume of provider reconsiderations and claims reconsiderations that we are handling. Part of the reorganization was to move the quality management team under Patty Wilson, who's currently our Senior Director for Contract Performance and Special Investigations. So we've kind of merged these teams into one large department that will be called Performance and Quality Improvement. So Patty would be supervising the, let's see if I can do this right, the Quality Improvement Advisory Team, which is Stephen Kazicki's team, the Special Investigations Team, which is Brandy's team, the Contract Performance Team, which does the monitoring and complaint investigations, and the Incident Response Team. So she will have all of those, which we think is going to help us achieve some efficiencies and also, eliminate siloing of those. They're all interrelated quality improvement activities, so we think that will help with that. That's really all I can speak to in terms of the areas under my purview. I don't know, Christina, if you want to talk about some of the other sections.
In the transition to community living, there was some reorganization. There were 4 managers currently in the department. We are going to reestablish, there were 2 directors, we're going to have 1 director, and there'll be 1 manager. We are meeting through a transitional plan. I have another very wonderful senior director who works directly for me, who will be the acting director over that program until the appropriate director can be hired and transitioned and put in place. There are some, I believe, reorganization within the department as we are looking at what the money we receive to run the department. Vaya has been very supportive of this particular department and really supporting it beyond the allocations we have received. So we're really going to be evaluating that. But I think the commitment to the organization, to the board, and to this committee is that at no point in time can we not continue to strive to meet all our the outcomes and the requirements are not changing based on our reorganization. So we must continue to really look at that. In responding to Marvin's comments a few minutes ago, I think that I think we would be foolish leaders if we're not always concerned as you make transitions and you have less people to work with than you do to, we will have less people than what we do today to do that. But I think that as Vaya and the leadership team made those decisions, we took into account that we felt comfortable enough that with the reorganization and some changes in the department, we could continue to meet, if not meet better, some of the things that we've struggled with in the past year. So I say that very honestly. We take it very, very seriously. I think with some of the Vaya Total Care, which is our integrated whole person care initiative, and where we're really trying to be very strategic, our #1 priority for the organization, that I think is we are very focused on trying to move that. We're trying to also help the rest of the organization. Transitional community living, the population of people it represents, is a specialty needs plan of its own. And so we're even looking at some point in this year, with this population of people, even with all the requirements on top of it, would they even possibly move and become part of the integrated care project over time? So again, looking at the future, trying to figure out what we have to deal with today, but changing what we currently have. So a lot of tremendous amount of seriousness. I think our leadership team, and as you and some of your board members have supported us, that I think that I'm always sensitive to say this, but I think at the end of the day, the decisions we've had to make as an organization to reorganize are very difficult and they're very personal decisions for a lot of people. 60-some people, right, got a letter. But I think with that, I think we have to do what's best for the organization to move the organization forward. We must learn to do this work better. Everything that every month you sit in here and listen to these reports, and I think majority of the time I think we look pretty good. I hope that's what all of you think. But I think that we, in the competitive world we're going to, we must learn to do this better and more efficiently. And we're going to find out if the number of people we're going to have come July 1st, we're going to be able to do that. We didn't set ourselves up to fail in that, sort of answering that question. I think we are in a discovery process to really figure out how are we going to learn to do this. Because none of these requirements go away at this point. We're in an old world and a new world at the same point in time. But the money is not matching the survival of the old and the new, and what we're paid to do and how we're paid to do this work. So appreciate your comment. It's probably a bit more than you wanted to know, but I think it's hard just to respond just about how we're going to keep doing this when it's a bigger decision that the organization made that we took. We cannot afford, when Brian or Tracy or different people who represent us in Raleigh, to negotiate some things we may no longer want to do as an organization. The thing that comes up more than anything is transition to community living, this DOJ settlement, and how are we doing in the dashboards and meeting the requirements, and that's usually one of the first things that somebody will throw up in our face because of the essence of what the settlement is. And so even though all this should be considered, what we find out is that the transition to community living is kind of the benchmark in many areas that may not make a lot of sense to some of us sometimes of what we are being scored against. So not that we don't take every bit of this information and data seriously, this is one that's really kind of more of a signature than some of the other things you look at. Very
I'm sorry to hear
complicated.
that, you know, because we do a lot of good things, and consumers I've talked with that have been transitioned, most of them are thrilled to be in the community, but it's just really important to get that right and not rush it.
It is important. The tolerance of systems, and I think the benchmarks sometimes, Pat, do not really align with what we know about transitioning people, getting people, helping people to be stable, and just moving to a very important piece of their life to hope, to the place they want to go, to the community, wherever they're coming from. To do all that in these benchmarks of 90 days or 30 days or whatever it is for pieces of that, it just doesn't match. I understand systems, we've been in a long time, but sometimes we're penalized for those things. Sometimes we could have done better. Well, I have to honestly say that. But sometimes it's very hard for any system to set a measurement of following and setting benchmarks for transition when you're dealing, of course, with human beings, right? Who are very complicated and very vulnerable.
I do not want to cut off discussion, but we have 2 critical annual documents that have to be approved, so.
You ready to move ahead? Everybody, go ahead, Stephen,
So next up is the quality management annual plan. This is a plan that goes to the state. It consists of 3 different sections. You have the annual plan, which is our plan for the upcoming fiscal year. Then you have our work plan, which is the kind of ongoing things that are being completed or having completed in the last year. Then you have our evaluation piece, which are the things that we have completed and things that we learned from the previous year. These are huge documents, so I'm not going to go through them in any detail, but it does show the scope and the depth and the huge amount of work that has been done in targeting improvements within our entire system. I want to note that this is a draft version. There are, and we know this, there are some grammatical errors and some errors in just cleanup process that we need to take care of. But we want to bring this to you guys to have a look at it. Take a look if there's, I'll let you know where we've gone, where we've been, and where we're going, essentially. So without any further complicating of the issue, do you have any questions about it?
What we'd be asking for both the QM plan and the compliance plan, which I'll talk about next, is that the committee recommend approval of these documents to the full board, subject to any minor grammatical or typographical corrections that need to be made. The QM plan is pretty much a completed document. One piece of it, I think the evaluation piece of it, it's basically a report that's generated from a database, so it's generated based on data that staff across the organization enter, and so that's where some of the typos have come from.
A lot of times people try to use acronyms and things like that, so it's it just needs to be cleaned up a little bit.
Okay, so I'm looking at quality improvement program evaluation draft.
Okay.
The first, page 31, I noted that discontinuing sort of engagement activity and then going to replace it with some other functions, and I was just wondering if those other functions are evidence-based, or if they are just what somebody thought might be a good idea.
You're on page 31, correct?
31, where we're talking about performance improvement goal in response to behavioral health crisis, community survival will reduce overutilization of possible emergency departments, because that's a big thing.
Right.
And you're going to discontinue assertive engagement activity, maybe just from the report? I don't understand.
So this had to do with some changes in our organization. We had hospital liaisons that were working with different departments. And so those hospital liaison positions have changed a bit. Now it's an acute response team. So it's going to be essentially changing from the hospital liaison to the acute response team, and those functions and those job duties are slightly changed.
Yes.
So it needed an
Right.
overhaul.
And that was, I mean, is there Is there evidence out there as to what reduces emergency readmissions?
Yes,
Is
so
that what
we-
this reflects?
There is also a QIP that talks about the admission, or rapid readmissions of inpatient and ED use. Part of that QIP, we did a complete literature review on, 13 different research articles about, I think you remember hearing about that. And so it really targeted what are the top 12 things that you can do to prevent readmission. So we took those 12 things, and then we wanted to make sure those 12 things were still applicable to our population and people we serve. So we did a record review of, I don't even remember how many individual cases of our members, and noted that all of the things they said in that research mimicked what we found in ours. And that kind of information was used to create the job descriptions and the job functions of the acute response team. And so now the new version of the QIP will really target and promote outcomes and measure those individual job functions to ensure that they are making successes on that rate. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
I have a question just about, we're going to approve this to the full board, and I just want to make sure that in this plan, is there anything that is substantially different or novel, or anything that you feel like we should be particularly looking at?
Probably the biggest and most exciting thing for me and being the quality management director here is we're going to a more team-based approach on how we monitor and assess and look at quality, our performance monitoring activities and our quality improvement activities and projects. We're moving more towards, it was kind of, departments had their own functions that were looking at that. Now we're creating teams that are not in that department, it's less siloed, I guess you would say, to really impact and look at the different measures that actually promote the quality improvement pieces. So to me, that's the biggest thing, is we're going to a more team approach and more outcome-oriented improvement kind of focus.
That sounds terrific, actually. And is there anything in here that you would say that like you looked at it and said, I hope nobody asked me about that?
Of course not.
It was just that we should just be aware of that, might come back.
Well, the things we've talked about, the ED readmissions, the inpatient readmissions, we talked about those in our measures in the core. They're stable, slightly increasing. We want to get a better handle on those things. We want to get a better handle on improving our processes. There's some things that happen and some processes that happen that are inefficient and ineffective.
Yeah.
We want to change those. My team is really focusing on improvement part of this, and that's what we want to do, is improve our processes, improve our efficiencies, do as much as we can to do work efficiently, do work the best we can, and then maybe use the resources that we're able to save to do something else.
Do something else.
Part of why we, for example, I mentioned we've hired somebody to handle the reconsiderations, is to hopefully give some more space to Stephen and his team. Probably a big chunk of what he's doing, unfortunately, which is not the greatest use of his time, has been dealing with requests for reconsiderations and claim denials, which there's just, the volume just increases. And so we're trying to say, you know what?
Let's get rid of the claims.
Well, let's at least, put that with one person who can handle all the reconsiderations and give Stephen some space to really do some other activities. And Stephen's being very modest also, but he recently completed what I believe is an international certification in quality something. Please tell them.
Certified Manager of Quality and Operational Excellence from ASQ, American Society of Quality. It's international.
Congratulations. And he's also being modest when he talks about going to this team-based approach, because the only way for us to infuse real knowledge and appreciation for quality improvement is if we go to this team-based approach, so that everybody's on board with that. I think about my own development going from basic quality improvement projects where folks on Stephen's team are like, okay, here's A, here's B, here's C. And then moving to the place where like, okay, I get those things. Now, when I have an advisory team that says to someone on my team or to me, so here's the next step. You've done this, this, and this. The next step is, and that's gonna be critical across the organization.
Yeah, that's terrific. Do you need a motion for this?
I got a question first. A lot of the start dates are in 2014. So does that mean they're like carryover goals, but there's part of things missing that had been done in previous years?
And some of those are things that we're obligated by either our accreditation or the state to keep monitoring. So we started monitoring then, so we have to keep monitoring. And some of the things, like you said, are things that we've been monitoring that a lot of times we learned something in monitoring it, and so we've either adjusted the scope or we're continuing to monitor it, but we're going in a different direction, or we're continuing a direction, or we attack something.
It might be helpful if, when you do that, if you put like, even if you can keep the start date, if you have like a.
Put two asterisks.
Yeah,
It's
change, you know, effective, or updated,
It's a great
blah, blah,
idea.
blah, because it looks like you have made no progress on some of them. And one of them that I'm responsible for is in there, so, so get it.
We can incorporate that feedback.
And it did increase this year.
I have 30 seconds left, and I just want to say that one of the most important, this is under the Quality Management Program description.
Yes,
And one of the most important things is a mission and vision statement.
yes.
And every time you do something, you have to go back and look at that and say, was that fit? So, and then under goals, under the values, no, under goals of the QM program, number 2 says the quality and appropriateness of care delivered within the system is adequate. And I would hope that at least adequate, or more than that. I mean, I think adequate in my experience has just been the story of my life. And it should be better, you know what I mean?
Maybe you should say meet standards as opposed to adequate.
And that also occurs under number 4, which is the network provider. And I think that needs to be reworded because it says network provider performance of providers in its network. I think you should just say performance of providers in its network. I know network provider performance must be a catchphrase or something, but it just sounds really silly.
We can make those changes. I will say some of this language is like direct quotes from our DMA and DMH contracts.
Oh, I see.
So
it has to be that way.
That's why we're probably using the word adequate.
Thank you for revising the blocks and the structure of the program to include our committee.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's wonderful. Anybody else have any comments for Stephen with regard to these 3 documents that we are going to recommend, please?
Can I ask one more question? You said number 4, and then you, and before
Number
that
2
you
is
said.
the other one that says will just be adequate.
Adequate, okay. I can't, I lost that document in my stack of documents, and it's on the vision,
It's-
right? Is it the
No,
vision?
this is under quality management program description, the second document.
Right,
On page 1 and 2.
okay.
I mean, suppose she said, you say, how was that? And she said, it was adequate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So,
I don't want to be adequate. I'm striving for improvement, so yeah, we want to be.
Adequate's probably the best, the worst the best.
okay, so, should we make a motion in here for them to present that to the board? Do I have a motion to approve the 3 documents that Stephen has presented to us?
Run down
In a second.
Either one of them.
I'll just skip to, is anyone opposed? Okay, so it's unanimous.
All right, the next document on the agenda is your 2017-18 Compliance Program Plan. This is another required document for us with the state and also under federal regulations that govern Medicaid managed care programs such as Vaya. There are not huge changes from last year's. I was thinking about Dr. Heck's question to Stephen, so I think what I would say we did this year that was very helpful, both Marvin and I attended the annual Healthcare Compliance Association conference. And they typically have a representative from the US HHS Office of Inspector General there to do a presentation. And one of the neat things they did this year, and I can pass this around, I can't give it to you because it's my only copy and I look at it every day. But they had prepared a roundtable document. There was a meeting of Healthcare Compliance Association experts and the OIG and a roundtable, and they produced what they called a Measuring Compliance Program Effectiveness Resource Guide. And this is a brand new document that just came out in January of this year. So this is the document that we really used and referred to in developing the plan, revising the plan, and then more importantly, if you look at Appendix A, which is the new stuff, this is our compliance work plan, which identifies the areas that we want to improve and strengthen over FY 17-18. And we really tried to use this OIG resource guide in developing those goals. I also included for you all a document that HHS has produced called Practical Guidance for Healthcare Governing Boards on Compliance Oversight that I thought you might find helpful as members of this committee. It has been amended slightly. It's written for corporations, and we're of course not a corporation, we're a government agency. So I amended it slightly to address the differences between being a corporation and a government agency. But I thought you might find this document helpful in terms of a resource as being the compliance oversight for Vaya.
I thought that was interesting reading.
So that's the compliance plan. I can go very briefly through the 7 parts, which again, we really tracked against this document. Part 1, of course, is our policies and procedures and standards, and you can see sort of 9 areas that we have goals to improve and strengthen over the coming year. Part 2 is the compliance program administration. Part 3 is screening of employees and vendors, which is both on our HR side and our credentialing side of our providers. Part 4 is communication, education, and training. Part 5 is the internal audits and reporting system. And so this includes our 2017-18 work plan for internal audits. This has been a fairly new development for Vaya to really implement a robust internal auditing and monitoring team, and I'll talk about that some more. But you'll see the plan for the areas that we intend to audit this year. And then we have the consistent enforcement and discipline section that has 4 points and investigations and remedial measures. So this is our compliance plan that we would be asking you to recommend approval to the full board.
I'll have to admit, I was pretty numb by the time I got to this report.
I thought you might be.
I did read
That's
it.
why I put it last.
And I didn't have any questions. But anybody else have any questions for Tracy on this? Do we have a motion to recommend this to the board? Second? Is anyone opposed? Okay, so that's unanimous also. Thank you, Tracy. I didn't get that on my packet, so there's no reading from me.
The last item on the agenda, Dr. Khan, is a request for you to go into closed session.
So, we have a motion to go into closed section pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11, A1, in order to prevent the disclosure of competitive health information, competitive health care information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 122C and 126.1, or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes, or to consult with attorneys pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11A3. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. And we'll go on to closed session.
I would ask if the board, if you will approve if Mr. Sanders can remain.
That would be fine. You have to stay.
It's been a journey. That's like
We gotta wait until
Last year we created organizations that I'll take that as a yes. Ronnie? Okay.
Thank you.
I got it.
Y'all can unmute us if you want to call us when you think we're on. So they can, you know.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. At this time, I'll do the roll call. Nancy Baker.
I'm here.
Okay. Ronnie Beal.
Here.
Jack Kahn. Here. Ira Dove. Ira.
Here.
Okay. Jeannie Duncan.
Here.
Joyce Edwards.
Here.
Jeff Heck.
Yeah.
Judy Johansson.
Here.
Billy Kennedy is not here. Mike Wagner is not here. Pat McGinnis.
Here.
Morris Pittman.
Here.
Steve Smith.
Here.
Mike Norris.
Here.
Mandy Stone. Pam Holcomb.
Here.
Here.
Okay. Wow.
Congrats, Mandy. I guess.
Thank you.
I'm on mute. Oh,
All right, our next item on the agenda is our second public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 17-18 budget. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to call that public hearing to order.
So moving, Chairman.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, are there any comments about the fiscal year 17-18 budget for Vaya Health?
I guess that's why I'm signed up.
Well, we'll actually do that in just a minute.
Oh, okay, excuse me.
Although, can you speak now? Yeah. Okay.
That will dispense of it. So, thank you, I'm Jim Barrett, and I'm the Director of Physical Legal Services, and I was out of the country last time when y'all met, and I sent some able representatives, but I did want to come and hear your troubles, because I know you're having great difficulty, and thank you all for all the work you do on behalf of people who need your services. It's got to be frustrating in these times, when every time you get going in one direction, the General Assembly changes it. So I can't imagine how difficult that is to manage. But I also wanted to just say thank you to the staff that we've gotten to work with the class project, and you know, just put in a word for that model to the extent that you can further that model in the future. I've learned in my 34 years of legal aid that if you spend money on one thing to help low-income people, especially mentally challenged folks, and you don't deal with their housing or their ability to pay for health care or whatever else it is that makes their lives work, you can be wasting the money that you spend for whatever that is. You can be wasting the money for affordable housing, or you can be wasting it for mental health care or any other care. So we try to advocate for that at Physical Legal Services, because we're all about helping people meet their basic needs, whether it's income, health, stopping domestic violence, or housing. So thank you for the opportunity to do that in the past year. I think we proved that it's a very effective thing to be doing to further people's health. And if you can find the money in the future to support that work, I just ask you to do that. So thank you very much. I'm willing to talk to anybody privately about it if you need to. I know you're up against it with this particular budget, and I hear that it got worse when they passed the budget. So I can sympathize, because they totally eliminated the Equal Access to Justice Act when they passed the budget, which eliminated most of the rest of our state funding. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else out there that wants to comment? This is our second public hearing on our budget. Okay, hearing.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Jerry Rice.
Like I said the last time, it's a little different from last time. I think the budget needs to be looked at in terms of quality of need rather than expanding into areas that we don't need to be expanding into. There's an old saying, and this is an individual saying, and I've heard all my life. When you get ready to live, you're ready to die. And that goes without saying when you live in a box or apartment, and then you start your life, and after a while you end up with a big mansion, and then you ain't got the kids at home no more. But all the things you got in your older days, you needed in your younger days. So it's just a little glimpse of what life really should mean. The quality of life is not necessarily on how much you got and what you possess. Quality of life is how meaningful it is to you and each other. And I bring this point up because what we need to be thinking about here is not what was exposed earlier about our organization. Organizational things can be changed anytime. But there's one thing that we need to focus on, and that is on the consumers. I don't like to call them consumers. They're real people. Let's just say our people. And that is a transition. We know that as individuals we come and live and we die. Organizations do the same thing. And what the mandates we're looking at right now, we know that we're going out. We're not going to be the same version of what we were. I think I've not heard a good plan in this budget of how we're going to do that for the consumers. I've heard a lot of organizational stuff. I've heard a lot of talk about quality, but it's always been around policy, procedures, and those kind of things, and not really talking about the consumer themselves. So I think in this budget, we need to be talking about how do we transition these people that we serve with quality of life until the vine dies that we're on right now. Because you know what? What you do in this room for consumers or people you call them, one day you might meet them on the street. And you know, I always think about it. How I treat you in public is what I'm going to treat you privately. And that's the way I've always been. So, the budget, please, let's focus on the content of the consumer or the person that we're dealing with and think about how to transition them, because you can forget if you think you're going to stay around and build something and a mansion out of it, you're badly mistaken. Let's plan for the consumer. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the budget, since this is our second public hearing? Hearing none, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Aye. Public hearing is closed. Okay, our next item is public comment. We had two speakers, but they have already.
I do have something on the public comment, just a small piece.
Okay.
Is Jim going to speak?
I don't think so.
The one thing I wanted to bring up on that is the new law of the 16 and 17-year-old that North Carolina passed. That's going to affect us as an organization to helping people, I think, in a different way. Rather than criminal, it's going to be into the juvenile court system in a different way. And I think it's going to have to open the doors up for more services of different kinds, because adult court don't operate like juvenile court, and it's going to be a challenge, I'd say, with the folks that we deal with here. So I would point that out if you hadn't looked at that. I hadn't heard nobody bring it up in terms of quality committee. So please keep your focus on that for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Okay, our next item on the agenda is review and approval of the agenda and the prior meeting minutes. Does everyone have a chance to look at review the agenda and the minutes from May 25th?
I move that we approve them circulated.
All right. There's a motion, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of approving the agenda and the prior meeting minutes of May 25th, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. All right, at this time, we have a new member, Dr. Rick Bunio from the Cherokee Indian Hospital Authority. And at this time, Rick, we need to swear you in as our new board member. So if you'll step forward. Just repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Rick Bunio,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and maintain
that I will support and maintain
the Constitution and laws of the United States
the Constitution and laws of the United States
and of North Carolina,
and of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of my office
the duties of my office
as a board member of Vaya Health.
as a board member of Vaya Health.
Congratulations.
Same pay rate, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Dr. Bunio, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, I'm a family physician. I've been working in Cherokee for the last 18 years or so. I'm originally from Canada, where I got my training, and my wife is from Cherokee, so she decided that she would rather live in North Carolina than where I grew up, which was a little colder. I've been fortunate to be the clinical director of Cherokee Indian Hospital for coming up on 2 years now, and have really enjoyed working with the tribe and their focus on behavioral health and expanding our recovery continuum. I look forward to seeing all the good work that you guys are doing here, and if I can contribute in some way, I think this will be well worth the trip and the traffic. So thank you for having me.
Welcome aboard. Let's give him a round of applause. All right, our next item on the agenda is conflict of interest disclosure. Tracy Hayes, our general counsel and CCO.
Since our last meeting, there was one potential conflict of interest reported to me. Pam Holcomb, our new board member, has reported that her daughter accepted a position with Mayhem. We do have a contract with Mayhem. It is not a contract for consumer services. It is a contract related to training and other initiatives around integrated care. Is that, I think, the best way to describe it. So it's really up to this board to determine how you want to handle that conflict. My recommendation would be simply that Ms. Holcomb recuse herself from any discussion or votes related to funding for Mayhem.
Do you need that form of motion?
Yes.
I move that we make that recommendation to the board.
Second.
Did you do a second?
I'm sorry, who was the second?
Mike, second. We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Being none, is all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous.
And then the second item, this is just a heads up. As Dr. Bunio mentioned, he is employed by Cherokee Indian Hospital Authority. We are in the process of negotiating a contract with CHIA related to B3 services. When that contract is finalized, I will come back to the board with a recommendation for how you should address that.
Thank you. Okay, a couple items to mention. One, we'd like to welcome Ryan Barber. She's our new clerk to the board, and let's give her a round of applause. Brian, you want to say something about the special recognition?
What a great honor I had to recognize we call her ours, I guess. Ronnie and Mike might take a little exception to that, because I concluded my comments when she got the award for, it's a Lifetime Achievement Award that the Council of Community Programs gives out each year, and I said she was a jewel for North Carolina as well as Western North Carolina, and certainly for Macon County. So it's just so nice to recognize someone who has done so much. I mean, in so many ways, you know, ahead of her time, a pioneer, a great advocate. It was great to be part of that award. So, and I know that some of our media folks followed up, and Ronnie's going to help. I think it's WLOS is going to do a story on her and do an interview out at the Senior Center, I think next Wednesday. We're really trying to get as much out of this as we can, because she sure deserves it. She got a standing ovation and then gave a great speech. So.
And this little story about Dorothy, those of you who don't know Dorothy's just a young 94 and doing pretty good. She was at the
99.
Huh?
99.
99. She was 94 one time. But she was at the Elder Abuse Walk last Thursday, and we walked together for a little ways, and
she outwalked you.
Yes, she did. But a car left the road and went through her house. Been about 4 weeks, right, Mike? And had Dorothy, this is where Dorothy stays in this room. And had Dorothy not moved maybe 20 or 30 minutes earlier, and when they called me to come over there right away, and I did, and but of course everybody was in a panic but Dorothy. So, but the car went well into the house, and hits good, maybe close to 70, 80 yards off the highway, Mike, and the car left the highway at a high rate of speed and entered the house, and so me and Dorothy were talking about it as we walked, and Dorothy was just worried about her house. She said the woman apparently needed mental health services. But anyway, Miss Dorothy was so appreciative of the remarks and of Brian and this organization, and she continues to work. I guess I talk to Dorothy at least twice or 3 times a week, and she continues to keep up with those in our area, in this catchment area, that need mental health services. So, but this is a lady who's invested her life. She has made in DSS, if you don't know Dorothy, she made inroads in DSS that are still in place today, 40 years ago, so, or longer than that. So we appreciate Brian, thank you so much, and she very much appreciates it too. And this is thanking someone where you still can,
Right.
And when this generation is gone, it's not somebody just passing away. This is someone that's irreplaceable. Christina can talk to you a little bit about that. So we appreciate it so much. For those of us who talk to Dorothy on a regular basis, that family does too. So thank you so much.
Thank you. In your packets, you have a resolution, and is everyone had a chance to review it? It's a resolution of the Board of Directors of Vaya Health to approve the purchase of apparatus, supplies, materials, or equipment from ADAP Pharma Inc. pursuant to North Carolina Statutes 143, 129E6. It's for Narcan. Has everybody had a chance to review that resolution? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes, sir. We have.
We have. Are you ready to, someone make a motion to approve?
So approved. So a motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Is there any discussion? All in favor of the resolution, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is report of our Chief Executive Officer, Brian Ingram.
Been a busy couple of weeks in terms of legislation. We have a budget, all but a state budget. came out, I guess it was Wednesday morning, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later. A lot of activity around House Bill 403, which we've talked a lot about here. We talked about it last year, we talked about it earlier this year as part of this section. And we got a heads up that it was going to take a little bit of a turn from the language that the House had voted on unanimously in Senate Health Committee. And there was a PCS that made very, very dramatic changes to the language, especially around Medicaid transformation. And you probably couldn't pick something more substantial to make modifications to, and especially in the last week or two of the session, PCS is, well, unusual, let's say that. Wasn't any caucus on it, just kind of appeared. We got a heads up on it really about 24, maybe 48 hours ahead of time. One of the features in there, and this was led by Senator Heiss, and one of the biggest features in there talked about the dissolution of the LME MCOs that would be consistent with the execution of contracts for PHPs for physical health. So, it passed on a voice vote, and then today was heard in Senate rules, where it also passed, and would be taken up next by the Senate, the full Senate. So on the other side of the legislature, the House, was very, very vocal in their opposition to it. Really a lot of conflict. Nelson Dollar was prohibited from offering testimony at the committee meeting, which is, let's say, unusual. Gives you some idea of where things have gotten to. And they, this week in Senate Health, took an existing Senate bill and stripped out the language, put in their original language of House Bill 403, which was really mainly intended to, say, provide a lot of restrictions on LME MCOs in relationship to the Cardinal audit. I have a lot of other things. It was a huge bill, but that was the main impetus for most of it. So they put their language back in the Senate bill, passed that unanimously, and then that's headed back to the Senate. And as I understand it, they have to respond very quickly to that. So, I guess what you conclude is that there's an enormous amount of political activity occurring right now. And the extent to which it represents good policy, I guess I'll let you decide. Many of the comments in Senate Health, and there's because people, you might have seen a newspaper story or something. We have a transcript of the hearing over there. It's shocking.
It's crazy.
I guess the how quickly it appeared without any, there wasn't even a Republican caucus on it. I talked to members of the committee, they only got a copy the evening before. Boy, this is awful big stuff to be playing politics with, in my opinion. So, we'll see where that goes. Again, there's a lot of politics going down right now, and people are at the end of the session. Whether or not this ends up being something that is even considered in conference committee, I guess anybody would have an opinion about that. You could certainly see where they wouldn't bother. I mean, they're just so far apart, and it's such a tremendous amount of conflict exists now between the House and the Senate with this that how would they resolve something? And again, something is enormous, and it's very far-reaching. I'm just kind of picking out the pieces out of us. mean, that isn't the kind of thing you deal with in conference committee at the end of the legislative session, in my view, but, and again, I'm not a legislator, so I'm trying to just report the facts to you and get you up to date on that, but that's an enormous shot across the bow. So, we will wait and see about that. I suspect the language in the, we call it the heist bill, isn't going to get too far. But nonetheless, it was an opportunity for a big message to get sent. So, any questions on any of that? On the budget, and I guess, you know, whether we kind of do this as part of the finance committee or what, I guess maybe we can start to transition into that. Where we left off was not knowing what the single stream reductions were going to be. And we now know what they're going to be. No one expects there to be anything different from the following scenario, that, you know, the governor would veto this budget and the General Assembly is going to override it. So minus any technical corrections, which sometimes there are some real wild cards in there, I think we got what we got now. And it actually got worse from what we expected. The way the single stream reductions, and this is important to note, and again, we talked about this last month, the methodology for calculating the reductions was done differently than 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they did it in a pro rata basis, in, you know, basically following the percentage that state funds are distributed. And that's really just part of a historical thing. It doesn't, you know, there's no perfect way that that's done. It's just how it had been done over the years. They changed it to follow a methodology that was just kind of invented, that looked at available cash and something about the reinvestment plans that LME MCOs had. So it was trying to rank how much money you had and what you were doing with your money, if that makes sense. What changed between the House budget and this, or even the Senate budget and this, is that they used updated, I think they used maybe April's data that we submit to DMA, and that changed things a little bit. It actually increased the amount of reduction that we have. And just to get you into the, you know, have some sense of the scale of this, again, there's recurring and non-recurring cuts, and, you know, without having a smile on my face, I don't know how I could even describe to you what those words mean now, since all of the cuts last year were non-recurring that are now become recurring.
They
So
wrote a new
whatever,
definition.
whatever definition those words have, perhaps I'm inaccurate in my understanding of those. So, some are labeled recurring, some are labeled non-recurring. The state total is, in recurring, 31 and change, non-recurring 55. So that's about $83 million statewide. We have the second lowest amount of reduction. In the second year, 18-19, it's 36 and 54. So, you know, you're in the neighborhood of a little over $90 million in reduction. And again, this comes on the heels of $262 million in reductions for the last 2 years. So if you're noting a trend here, you'd be correct. And this goes to a lot of what we spoke about in the last, our last meeting. I mean, the decision to use the Medicaid savings associated with our successful operation of a managed care plan are clearly a revenue source for the state. In fact, I have to give Senator Tucker credit, and it's somewhat ironic. I've come to know him very well, and he has a reputation, and some of you folks might
know at least of him. And he was in that Senate Health Committee, actually opposed Senator Heiss's language. And I think there's a quote here somewhere where he essentially asked what, let's see. Again, we swept $150 million in our budget from LME MCO, Senator Tucker said. I don't know who is going to be our cash cow in 2 years. So, you get the picture? So, we have our numbers to make, and we put together this chart to really help to kind of orient people to that. We included the IGT, stands for Intergovernmental Transfer Payment, which is, again, it's government giving government money. We have to, and again, I guess to make this simple, this represents a cut. This was something new that they added in, that we have to repay the state's portion of the risk reserve. So we've included that there as part of the reduction. Whether or not, I mean, it's not necessarily a single stream reduction, but it ends up being a net loss to us, if you will. So in single stream, we have to make $7 million worth of reductions in the first year and almost $9 million in the second year. And then you add in the IGT payments we have to make, which are required to come out of our admin funding. So the bottom part of the chart talks about how we would do that. And again, we emphasized last time, the language is, and Jennifer put it there on the, I think, the bottom of the slide. We had a lot of conversation about what the same level of service utilization really means. It could mean the number of people served. It could mean the level of services. It could be the amount of money. I think what we're going to do is just pick money, and that's not because it's to our advantage, but for the purposes of constructing a budget, probably the easiest metric to choose for that. So when we go and look back at the base year, which is 2014-15, we can make reductions of $4,578,000 and change to get back to that base of 2014-15. To make up the rest of the $7 million, we need to use $4.9 million in fund balance, which was more than we had anticipated when we last met. So that's why we were being a little bit tentative in our approach to that, but just kind of bookmarking that there was going to be some level of reduction, and ends up being more. And then you see the same for 18-19. Now, one of the things about this, you can follow this logic, is given the recurring elements, and there's some debate about this, but our understanding is that in the second year, the recurring gets added to the recurring, if you follow me. So it becomes a double reduction on recurring. Make sense? We haven't seen that in writing, but that's, the understanding that we have. So it ends up being a reduction on top of the other reduction, if you will.
It's a reverse compound.
Yeah, I mean, however, it's hard to find the right words to describe it, but if you see that's why that 4.5 million, when you carry it over, I guess I should have a pointer here. When you see the 4.5 carried over into the 18-19 in the asterisks, that's what that means. Once you take that out, well, for us, that's taken out, and then you have to do the rest in the fund balance. So we can kind of stop there. I think that's probably a big chunk of understanding how the state budget now relates to a lot of what we talked about last month when we met. I mean, these are pretty much the numbers we're going to live with. And then, of course, I guess what would follow would be, more about our thinking on, how we would manage those reductions on the service side. And we could go through that both in terms of the reinvestment plan that we had to essentially completely eliminate. And then also how we would manage to make the reduction of $4.5 million. But we'll kind of pause there. And then the other side of that is we can update you on the status with our reorganization. And then I guess from communicating back and forth with Steve, I think we found some broad brush illustrations that help to demonstrate kind of what's happening, what these numbers represent in terms of how our fund balance and the available cash within our fund balance, how that's just changing dramatically and has over the last few years. And I guess what I would add is that, we're seeing a very clear trend here. And it used to be, for Senator Tucker to just sort of say it out loud, I think is a big statement, And you combine that with the comments of Senator Heiss, that, his plan, and he said he was speaking for the Senate, was to eliminate LME MCOs. They're gonna just take all of our money till we're gone. That's their plan.
What does he have against the LME MCOs? Is it just the cardinal thing, or, looks like he'd be proud of this area and the LME MCO we have here.
I prefer to not speak for him, and that's why we made the, essentially the transcript of the hearing available, and just let people draw their own conclusions.
So it's on our website?
No.
Right over here. It's amazing, I said read it in between finance and in here. I can't even begin to imagine where that man's mind is. It just startles me.
It's on the money he's getting from the insurance.
Yeah.
I didn't say that.
Oh, I will, I tell him that, but.
I spoke to Senator Van Dyne a couple of times, tried to communicate with Senator Davis. I got an email from him. He indicated his support for this language, which I was very disappointed with.
What's Terry's stand on it? It's on Cedar Saturday.
Oh,
Totally, yeah, what I thought. I knew I'd spent a lot of time with her on that.
again, be careful to speak for other people, but I think she's clearly upset by it. So, this is, solemn news, but yet, will House Bill 403 in the language that was proposed by Heiss going to go anywhere? Nobody really believes that. I think it'd be a miracle if it even got into conference committee. But to be as bold as he was with his comments, big message. So, we're in the food chain. We do our best to try to shape. I regularly meet with him. Most of the leadership in the General Assembly, I have a good relationship with. I do what I can. We have excellent government affairs contracts. We work very hard at shaping things. And at the end of the day, we get what we get. And this is a difficult budget, but we have done, or we are prepared to do what we need to do to properly manage it. That's what I can tell you. And that's what we do. That's what we do. In reference to some of the earlier public comments, we'll get into this, and Donald is really the expert here. We do this in the absolute best way we can. We've managed a lot of service transitions. Providers will go out of business. There'll be big contract changes. kind of amounts to the same thing if you're a consumer or family member. There's a big change in your life. And we really get that and work very, very hard. We kind of call it, it's microsurgery for us in terms of how we manage those changes. And, Donald and his folks have been at it for a while. Now, beginning really with last month when we were getting some idea. And, are much more prepared now to kind of go forward. The thing about this, of course, you have to remember is that because these are annualized amounts, if you don't move quickly, you just make it worse. So, because you have to take more money later in the year. So beginning July 1st, when our contract season begins, we're going to have to be talking with providers very, very soon and communicating these reductions. And in some cases, we've already begun that. So I'm going to just maybe stop there. That's a lot about single stream reduction, the numbers, 2 years worth. And if people don't have any questions on that, I guess the most logical thing would be to, we could look at maybe we just kind of look at the fund balance trends so you get an illustration of what's happening. Again, all the words I talked about, the drivers, what we see happening from the General Assembly and in fact from the Department of Health and Human Services, how that is affecting us now. And it's essentially our vulnerability. What's happening is not in our control. We're being required to spend money in ways that we haven't been required to do before. And much more of our spending authority is being either eliminated or reduced. So this is the picture. And it's so, I guess, infuriating to hear the misinformation about fund balance, how that's misrepresented, and how, in some cases, you look and there's a comment, I think, in the transcript around how there's $1 billion available in the state. I mean, it's just not true. I don't know what other words to use. So much of our money we aren't allowed to touch. So do we have almost $100 million in fund balance? Yep. How much of it can we touch? I don't know. We're going to be down to about probably 30 million by 18, 19. And you can see the drastic reductions that have occurred. Some of that has been in our hand. And again, I'm talking again about the drivers from, that we talked about last month. We were very aggressive in our reinvestment efforts. And what I can say to you is if we hadn't have done that, we would have had a bigger check to pay back. So there's no perfect place to be with this. But that gives you, that's the illustration right there. So if we want, we can go and talk about the services next, but this is maybe kind of a good transition place where we stop talking about the money and talk about the services and actually the how we would go about doing this. Whatever would be the best. Well, now, you want to kind of talk people through this, you get the fun part.
Sure. So, one of the things we tried to look at in looking at these reductions is how do we get the reductions by maintaining the priorities we've set in our community. So one, maintaining that we have crisis services in all 23 of our counties. We maintain access to services for people with that are uninsured across all of our counties. And that we're making sure that we're honoring the residential placements of people in their homes. Basically, we're not kicking people out of their group homes, their apartments, trying to create some stability in that housing. So how can we maintain some level of service across the system? So the first thing we looked at, what are some services that we thought we can either reduce, that would have minimal impact on the system, or how we can compress some of the services to where we could still offer services in the community, but not a full range of services, if that makes sense. So people that are uninsured could still get services, but they may not get as many services available to them as, say, a Medicaid individual within the system. So to start going through the list, the YB Life Step program was one that we rolled out. It's a great program. It works with people, children that are in that transitional age. You will see in the state budget, the General Assembly actually provided some direct funding for that program for them to survive. So we're proposing that we can pull back some of the funds that we have for them without crippling that program and allow it to continue, because they're getting some additional funds from the General Assembly to help support that. We had some money that we had budgeted to do jail diversion efforts, the Stepping Up initiative. You guys are hearing about that? We're in all of your counties trying to make that work. So we had dedicated some money to try to do that. We pulled that money back off the table, so we wouldn't be able to fund some of those efforts. We had $200,000 to do some housing development. Did we pull out the table again? Nobody's in this housing yet. This was to try to expand housing for people with disabilities within our system. So we pulled that back off the table. Project Search, this is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. If you know this program, these are people with intellectual developmental disability that are out there working, getting jobs. They have internship programs at Mission Hospital. They've been on WLS, they've been in the papers. It's been a great program, but it's not a treatment program. Didn't meet our priority levels, so we would be recommending to pull funding back from that program. In addition, we would pull some money back from our recovery housing efforts, which is not a required funding for us. It's something that we know we need to do in order to support people that are recovering from substance abuse, but we would pull that money back off the table as well. A couple of the others, programmatic pieces we would look for. We'd be reducing some more transportation costs in the system. We're not required to cover transportation. We've been doing that because that's been needed to transport people that are voluntarily being admitted into hospitals on mobile crisis. So we would pull that out of the system. What would happen is people are going to get stuck places more easily with that. But again, it's someplace that's not directly impacting treatment for people, so we pulled it back. Substance abuse recovery, that's a grouping of services we've had budgeted around Medicaid-assisted treatment, around some of the halfway house and some of the other stuff around substance abuse. We're pulling that back off the table because what you've seen in the other budget on the finance side, we recently got some additional CARES grant money. So we feel we can backfill some of these programmings with some of our CARES dollars. It's already targeting that substance abuse population. So we can reduce some dollars there while not necessarily eliminating the services, if that makes sense. So this is a single stream reduction, but we'll have some designated grant dollars that we'll be able to fill some of that back in within the system on the substance abuse recovery side. The next ones are really the biggies, impact for us to draw your attention to. Community Support Team, ACT, and ADVIP. These would be direct reductions to those programs by about 50%. So for the ADVIP programs in your local communities, it would be reducing the number of people in those programs by about half. So some of those programs may not even be able to function if they reduce those numbers that low. So at some point, some of those programs may go out of business in order to have it, and we may have to move people or try to find other services and supports to support those people. We left IDD periodics at the moment on the table, and we haven't made any reductions in those periodic services. So we think that we can provide some additional periodic services potentially to them within the current budget. Where it hurts is family members that are using these day programs for their loved ones to go there during the day so they can get a job, and now that day program won't be there. Or if those individuals are in a group home and they're going to that day program, the group homes are now going to have additional staffing in the group home, so their costs go up while they're not getting extra reimbursement. So there could be some backlash on how stable some of those group homes can be, needing to support those individuals in the home that had been leaving the home during that day. ACT is a big one. We have a lot of uninsured people that are getting ACT services in the system. This would be about a 50% reduction of the people that are getting ACT in the system would no longer have access to that service. What we would do is we would backfill the availability to service to them where they would be able to get outpatient treatment. They would get medication management from a psychiatrist, and they'd be able to get peer support services. So they would still have access to those services being uninsured, but they wouldn't have the full range of what an ACT team brings. That's them coming out to their home with a psychiatrist and a nurse and a vocational specialist, and the housing specialist, all that ACT brings. They won't have access to that. These are also the people that are showing up in our jails and our EDs. So we expect that we probably will see increases in our community systems being impacted by these people not getting those services, because most of these individuals aren't going to show up for an outpatient appointment or struggle to show up with an outpatient appointment and need more aggressive outreach. We hope that peer support, increasing peer support on the state side will help some with that, but we know that's not a magic bullet to fix any of that. So those are the processes we'll go through. On the last services, what our plan is to reduce the people coming into those services. So people that are already receiving those services, we will continue to pay for that and continue to support their treatment in those services. But in order to start reducing the flow and have that 50% reduction, we will notify our providers that we will no longer do new admits into those treatments, which will slowly bring those numbers down over the first 6 months so we see that 50% reduction by the end of the fiscal year. So that'll be the challenge for those new people needing to come into the system.
Donald, in adult day, are you talking about Rutherford Life Services? Are you talking about Jerry in the group home?
This is for like Rutherford Life Services. It'd be the day programs that a lot of people go to, and only the ones that are doing the state-funded ADVP. So a lot of the day programs also do innovations, day supports, all those services. None of those are impacted on the Medicaid side. So it only impacts individuals that are not on the innovations waiver and are going to a day program during the day. I don't have those numbers in front of me, the number of people impacted, but I could get that for you guys if you're interested. So some of the challenges is in the real rural programs that are operating. They don't have big numbers, so a 50% reduction in them is a significant more impact than a Rutherford Life, which is a much larger program, will probably be able to maintain a program maybe like a Transylvania vocational program or an Avery program that has smaller numbers will struggle more.
That's what I was wondering, if this would impact them enough that even though Jerry could go, would this just squeeze them where they wouldn't be there? But it sounds like they may be able to survive.
Yeah, I mean, the providers will have to contract on how they're providing those services. So, less revenue coming in, they'll have to reduce their costs. Probably reducing their costs means reducing staff, and they can manage them and the ratios of people they can serve, so they won't be able to accept as many people into the program. So that's how the process will go through. We'll do this in a real systematic manner. There's a lot of different contracts that are represented in each of these service lines and support. So our process will be to begin conversations with those providers first to make sure we have a good process to go through on the reductions, and then we'll begin talking with our community stakeholders, people that are going to be impacted, our law enforcement, our hospitals, DSS, health departments, making sure they know what our plan is, how we're going to work that plan, and to make sure that people can get access to as much services that we have available to them.
Have you done an assessment of how many people will no longer have services? And just from a public relations also, how many jobs, both direct and indirect jobs, that eliminates?
We can, on some of the service lines, we've done some studies on the number of people per month that are entering those programs versus how long their episode of care is, and then how quickly that sort of titrates over a period of time. So we can give those numbers, and what we've been seeing over the last couple of years is the number of uninsured people accessing these services continue to go up. So, you know, we can show you a trend and try to calculate what we think it's gonna be this number, but in reality, the need probably matches, is significantly more than what we're already, our penetration rates are. So we could give you numbers in each of those service areas. The active numbers are gonna be pretty solid. We know how many people are affected with that. Those numbers are pretty flat in our system. The fee-for-service systems are a little harder for us to project because of the way the certain individuals come in and out of those services, but we can get close. I don't have those for you tonight, but we could put those together fairly quickly.
I mean, and the other thing is because of the quickness. I mean, if Senator Heiss, everything in Senator Heiss' bill was actually passed, there would also be, I would presume, because of the rapidity of it, there would be a significant lag period before it was taken over by a fully, you know, integrated service. There would be a certain degree of chaos that would happen for a while, and it'd be interesting to know, like, or important to know, how long is that lag period likely to be?
It's probably, well, there's about a 90-day cycle for some of these services of people rotating in and out of those cycles. So one of our first conversations, and looking at Jeannie over here, is really getting with our comprehensive. So what we've managed to do, and you've seen this in the other budgets, you're not seeing in here, our walk-in services, our pricing services that all do exist in each of our counties. We have not touched those. They're still available. Anybody can walk in and get services, same-day access across all 23 counties. The issue is that they may not have access to the ACT, the CST services, but they still can get those outpatient services. They can still get peer support and those medications. So our goal is to serve the same amount of people.
Just fewer services.
Just fewer services at a lower cost.
So you're gonna basically cut CST and ACT out of the state-funded benefit rate?
Yes.
Completely?
Well, we're gonna do a 50% reduction, so it won't be completely cut out, but in order to get to that 50%, we're gonna have to suspend new people coming into the program until we can get our numbers to where they need to be. And then at that point, if we can stay at that, then we can maintain. And then for some providers, it's different. So in our comprehensive, they have a capitation. So for you guys, it's a little easier. We can reduce your capitation by 50%. You know how much money to work with. You
Not
know
by
how
50%,
well,
for those services.
For those services, yeah, exactly.
No!
For fee-for-service, we can't do that. Because they're in not capitation. We actually have to limit the people that are coming in to get those authorizations. So it'll be a multi-tier approach in order to get the reductions.
What's sad is, once again, it's gonna penalize the rural counties the worst. These cuts will penalize the rural counties, making everything west out of the 23 catchment area. If you take the rural counties out of that, it's gonna penalize 17 counties, much worse than the other counties. You look at the our adult day vocational program in Macon County, and the little number is 65,000 for transportation. It might be the smallest number on the board, but without that, it's huge. I mean, if you can't get there, you're not gonna go.
Yeah.
And he's definitely right on the community treatment and on the community support team. If you don't go there, they're not gonna show up. We know that. We've battled that for years. So, that the rural counties, this has had the largest impact, because the larger counties can maybe fill in the gap. A lot of the smaller counties cannot, especially those in the west and a lot of them in the north. Mitchell County being one of them, by the way. Mitchell County, that's where Spruce Pine is, if you don't know. That's, some people live. Senator Heiss live there. But it's, but for rural counties, the budget, not just what you had, and I totally understand. And I think you've done a pretty good job with what you had to work with. You gotta do what you gotta do. But for the rural counties, for those candidates, we can't backfill it either, not all of it, but for our little vocational programs, in a rural county, if you've not been to visit one, or never know what that is, you need to go find out.
Donald, are you hoping that C3, 356 will be able to pick up? Or is it basically what we're seeing in reduction, which we know these are the neediest of the neediest, gonna end up swamping the hospitals again, which is, we had hoped to come down, now it's gonna get worse? Or do we think C3, 356 will be able to pick up any of this fallout that we're seeing from, especially from ACT and these kind of services?
Well, I mean, you can't replace a $4.5 million hole, let's say that out loud. What we're trying to shore up in this, we're shoring up our crisis system. We're making sure our crisis system is solid and intact in all 23 of our counties. That includes C3, that includes Dr. Caldwell facility-based crisis, that includes expansion we've done in Balsam to really beef that Balsam Center up, to really make that work on a crisis system. And then we've shored up all of our basic outpatient treatment services. So those basic, give people what we can, and we've crunched the middle sector of the continuum of care in order to get that. One of the hard parts about this, just so people understand the pieces of it, if you look at the legislation around the requirement that we have to make matches on the substance abuse block grant as well as the mental health block grant, it limits the availability of what pots of money we can actually make these reductions out of, because you have to match some of those dollars in the system. So when you got mental health block grant and substance abuse block grant, what do you don't have? You don't have an IDD block grant. So you're not really matching anything against that. So when you look at the IDD system, where if you've seen the pie graph that Jennifer shows, 55%, 60% of our money is in IDD services, is that where can you touch that? A big chunk of that money in IDD is in residential care. It's in keeping people in assisted family livings, in group homes. So what we decided to do is we took all that money, we took it off the table. It's like, we're not kicking anybody out of their homes, we're not kicking anybody out of their group homes, that's solid. Well, what that leaves left for consideration is advent programs and periodic programs for the system. Advent becomes the first choice because it's a relatively outdated program. It's not really best practice. It goes against the waiver that tries to integrate people more into the community. So it sort of becomes that first. Unfortunately, our system's not ready to absorb the next step of the evolution of that.
It's also
absolutely. But there's really not a lot of other places for us to go for the money. If we spread outside of this continuum, we either have to eat into the outpatient basic level services, or we have to start eating at our crisis system.
So basically, we as IDD parents who survived it, and Jerry still got his services, and most of us still do, it's now going back, for me, is to go back to this IDD community and say, refocus yourself. Now you got to fight for the people who don't have the services. We fought for our IDD, and I'm very glad that I have, and I'll continue to do that. But it's going to be the mindset now is the IDD community needs to go and step up and help fight and start voicing for this community that's going to get hit the hardest. And that's exactly what I intend to do is we're going to have to refocus. We survived. Now we're going to have to help the others.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take everyone sort of working to figure out how this works. I think on the IDD side, there's definitely some numbers there, but those numbers that impacted on the IDD side with this cut are much smaller than the number of mental health act CST people that are going to be impacted. My biggest concern, I'm concerned about all of it, but those individuals that are getting ACT, those are the ones I think we got to work really closely with our law enforcement and our hospitals on how do we serve those difficult people without that type of service available to them. And if the trend, like Brian says, continues to get worse, that only gets worse. At some point, the whole ACT service for uninsured goes away, and some of these programs will just have to absorb. The positive thing with the ACT and the CST is the majority of those providers have enough Medicaid revenue coming into those teams, is that they're not going out of business. Those teams won't dissolve in order to sustain. So I think on the provider side, the biggest provider issue will be on the IDD side because of the small rural ADVIT programs and how they operate.
Well, got another find.
So, again, Steve, this kind of goes back to our, communication. There's a range of things here. There are things for which they aren't underway yet. They were planned to do, are partially done, they're at a phase, and we're just saying, as Donald was saying, look, we're gonna have to stop here. We're not gonna do the rest of it. There's other things that, the other end of the spectrum is, yeah, ADVIT, it's, there'll be a lot of disappointed people with that. You heard his description of how limited the area becomes where you can make the reduction. At the end of it, there isn't, these are the best, this is the best, we're not going to kick people out of their homes. We're not going to jeopardize, the crisis services. We could take more money out of fund balance. We put ourselves in financial jeopardy by doing that, is what we're saying to you. There isn't a good place to go here. There isn't a good place to go.
And if I have a question about this, Brian, is it just better to wait till we get into the budget discussion? I mean, this was a great explanation.
So,
We're getting out of the preventive mode and into the crisis mode, which is what you do, and you don't have the luxury of doing it properly.
I mean, Jim's comments, how we talk about, some aspects of this, that we've really been happy to be able to expand into more of the, social determinants, if you will. We can't do that. It's a narrower scope. So, that's what it is. Now, are there some wild cards in here that at this point, we can only say, well, here are the wild cards. The budget language contains the same terms, if you will, that were included previously around, if there's an excess revenue in Medicaid, there can be a $30 million kind of kickback to us that's prorated. And we're waiting for that for this year, in fact. And I don't know what our share of that is, off the top of your head. So, some money could come back into the system. Can we use B3 services more effective? I didn't want to say effectively. Can we use B3 services again? Because what we have to do is move away from the non-Medicaid stuff. If we can get Medicaid services, there's so much more money there for us to be able to kind of play around with. If we can get people into more B3 services, make better use of those, that can help. It's not the same, but it helps. It helps to buffer. Are there going to be grants that take up the slack? So does it become a little bit of a, I don't know, you could call it a shell game, instead of spending the single stream on it, the Cures grant that we're going to get funding for. We'll be able to backfill with that. I mean, these aren't ideal, but they're the best we can do.
Have you identified which substance abuse recovery services?
Yes. The actual services or the providers?
Either or.
Yeah, I ain't getting into particular providers before I've actually called them and really talked to them about that.
So which service?
So we're looking at some Medicaid-assisted treatment providers that are getting, for the opioid issue, as well as some of our halfway house contracts that we did. We think that our MAP providers will be able to contract with them for Cures funding next year, so we won't necessarily reduction. We'll actually probably increase if you've seen in our budget, we got $400,000 for the CARES thing that we can't even spend before the end of the year, the way it's budgeted. So we're hoping that the budget in next FY18 we'll be able to backfill some of that hole. We don't know what that allocation is going to be. We don't know where all the restrictions of that, so we can't say now whether that will be a complete reduction for those providers or we'll be able to use that funding. We think that funding will be available for us to support those services, at least at our current level, if not higher, in the new year.
So the walk-in centers and the programs that are already like treatment,
Those are untouched.
So these are more of the additional.
Yeah, these are our methadone programs and our Suboxone programs that are currently out there. And right now, we only have two state-funded MAP programs. We expanded that with the CARES funding just recently to 4 or 5 programs in our Canton area. But those contracts will be on hold until we know we get any additional allocations.
I'm not the city.
No, I just
wanted to know the person.
Yes. But, for people that are, they'll still be able to get outpatient substance abuse treatment as well as the substance abuse intensive, the SIOP levels of care, plus all of our CAS programs, our residential substance abuse treatment programs, all of those are completely intact and in touch.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm just trying to organize the dialogue here to be most helpful for folks to understand, the budget. I guess the other part, so if we get off the service side, we can go to the admin side. I mean, basically our money is in, a couple of big buckets. It's all the service money and then it's our admin. And, what we did, we did a, very significant reorganization as part of that. And I guess Christina can give us a, little bit of a rundown on this. This graphic gives you, an idea. Eliminated, there were a lot of positions that were riffed, and then we added a lot of positions. And then, there's a net in all of that. So I'll just let her talk about that. Don's not available this week, so.
Sure. So good evening, everyone. So as you look at the graph up there, you can see the numbers. For you who were with us last month, we talked a lot about the reorganization and the reasons around all that and the purposes. I would just definitely want you to know as a set of board of directors that this has been a very high-touch situation. Every single Monday at our executive leadership team, we have held ourselves accountable to exactly where each individual staff member is, where are they in the process, what were the jobs that they applied for. We have lists and grids. We followed people. To be very honest with you, we had very individual decisions, I would say, about certain staff. As I said last month, none of these staff received a letter of reduction based on some personal issue or being poor employees or low performers. These are all very, very good people who work in the system today. So I think that, that this has been very difficult. I think as I look around the room and I see our executive leadership team in the room, to know how much personal time and energy and the amount of time that people have checked on people. And also, I think there's been a lot of really good discussion. As you can see, some people chose not to apply. Some people did not receive offers for a variety of reasons. I mean, at the point of day, everybody who was a hiring manager had their choice 1, 2, or 3. Sometimes some people had 3 or 4 choices that they were given, and they could go where they wanted to in the system because they're just that dynamic of an employee or had the right set of skills, knowledge, and abilities. So, I think that in a very difficult time for an organization, you have all what you've just heard about, you've been hearing about for months from the General Assembly and the impact of the system and how it's changing all of us, and then you have the internal pieces that are some of the repercussions of those types of decisions that lawmakers make, that it is a very difficult time across the board. I would remind everybody that every single level of this organization was affected. Every single level of this organization took responsibility to feel the reorganization and the impact that it was going to have. We are down, as you will know this, other than just a few people, their employment, the people who were not able to either find a job or we did not choose to rehire somewhere in the organization, they are down soon to their last week. Next Friday is June 30th. So majority of people, we will be having closures with them. That's already started in many things. Several of us have been involved in many transition meetings. One of the positions we did establish was a position of the Director of Organizational Effectiveness. Sounds like kind of an odd name for some people, but a lot of, when you look throughout the commercial healthcare industry, you see these types of people. This is a one-man show. We probably should have at least 2 or 3 of these type people, but this person is going to, after you do a reorganization to this effect in an organization of this magnitude, and all the changes coming from so many different directions, you really have to have somebody who will help do a tremendous amount of work in the departments to look at business flows, look at business operations, and are there any efficiencies that we could, this is going to change work patterns basically in some areas across the whole organization. I don't say that in a bad light. I think that in many ways it'll make us better at what we do. It's going to force us to have to look at things. We definitely have really made a commitment to really absolutely, this came up in some of the previous committees this afternoon, we must continue to meet our requirements. Very little of that has changed. If not, there may be even some more put on us and penalties to come with that. So all this is a very, it's all connected. Nothing is done in isolation. And I think what we've tried to do in the reorganization, as you look at the numbers of this staff, is to look at the full impact. Once you make the decisions, you go through the process of people leaving, you reorganize the organization, and what are the outcomes, and how are you going to continue to meet the outcomes that we must continue to be a solid, qualified organization, to be in the competitive marketplace, which is where we're going. So, I think overall, has it been hard for staff? Yes, it has. This is a very close-knit culture where, we care tremendously about people, and I think people have really had to settle into accepting what is happening. And so I appreciate your support, and I think we will continue to need it as we move forward. I think none of these staff really want to leave, to be really honest. They really, it's been a great compliment and you as the board of directors should know that, who was overseeing this organization with Brian, to know that there's a lot of people who just can't believe they're not going to be able to, a lot of these people were expecting a, 10, 15, 20-year relationship with us. And they will fall out into the system. These are good people. We'll have great, and some people have had great opportunities, I do want to say that, and we're very happy for them, so.
But basically, there's gonna be almost 30, there's gonna be 30 less people, but somebody else is gonna have to pick up their workload. That work's not gonna go away just because 30 people or 29 people are not gonna be here.
Most of that work will remain the same, but we will have to, but there will be some efficiencies. As a matter of fact, Pat, we've had some good conversations among some of the departments. Sometimes when you're forced to do things, even though it feels very negative initially, sometimes it forces you to look at some things. And so, I want to be fair that, yes, I can look at Donald and Rhonda, myself and any of us, or Trey, all of us who are running these departments. Yes, you have to look at it, but the work is still there. The requirements are still there in the contracts. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you want to do we're going to keep going on the budget, let's do the finance committee report separate after that? To just kind of aid the transition here, or?
They need to do the finance reports, and they need to.
Approve the budget ordinance, and we also have some budget amendments from this budget year and a budget amendment for 17-18 to talk about. So why don't we do that next? Okay, at this time, report of the Finance Committee and Acting Chief Financial Officer, Jennifer Trinell.
I'm sorry, do we want to do the budget first or the reports first?
Reports.
Okay, good. That makes it easier, they're in that order. The first documents that you have within your package after the notes or minutes for the Finance Committee are labeled on the lower right-hand corner with a document number. The first one is the current ratio. We measure that for Medicaid and in total. We are exceeding the requirement of a current ratio of 1. We are over that around 3, but one of the things that I want to point out is we are starting to see the downward trend. It started in February, and that will continue to decrease over time as we are spending down fund balance. That also means we're spending down cash. And when cash goes down, the ratio will decrease also. No concerns that we will not be above the target. The target line is in red. It would take quite some time before we get to the red line. So we will continue to see a decrease, but we are far and above where the standards are. The next document is the Medicaid defensive interval, and that says document 2. Medicaid defensive interval is a measure of how many days cash we have on hand before we run out of cash, should we get no more money in the door. Our requirement is to have 30 days cash on hand. We are still running at 3 times that amount. We're still over 90 days. We won't see a huge drop in that as well, and that stayed relatively stable. The only spike that you can see there in November was due to some changes in money that was owed from the state that came late, but otherwise that's fairly consistent. No real changes as far as that's concerned coming up. The next ratio is the third ratio that we measure, and it's the medical loss ratio. You can see that it has been increasing over the last 2 months. The 3-month trend looks a little bit strange because we had February a dip. What the medical loss ratio looks at is your expenses compared to your revenue. But because February only had 28 days in it, we had less expense because we just had fewer days in the month, whereas the revenue still comes in consistently. We are seeing that that trend is increasing slightly. That's our dollars being spent on services are increasing. Nothing alarming. Again, our goal is to stay over the 85%, and we do not have issues with that at all.
There's such an irony in this to point out, because we spend so much of our Medicaid money on services, we have less cash savings, right? So on the other side of it, it makes us tighter on that fund balance cash side. This is really important to understand kind of the dynamic property here in the budget, because we have such a high penetration of service on the Medicaid side. We, as a result, have less savings that makes this cash fund balance scenario more difficult.
The next document is document 4, which is the income statement. This shows our revenues and expenses for year to date. It splits it out between Medicaid and non-Medicaid. We only budget in total, so the comparisons to budget are in total. You can see that at total revenues, we had $321 million in revenue. We are $31 million under budget. That is due to the fact that to create a balanced budget, we're required to budget fund balance appropriations. No money will ever appear as actual fund balance appropriation revenue because what we're doing is spending down fund balance. So that will continue to be a variance through the end of the year, and with money being appropriated next year, that'll also show. But overall, we're actually really close to on track if you exclude the fund balance. The amount of revenue that we've received in all the other categories is off by less than 1%. For expenditures, again, this is in line with where we expected, other than we are spending fund balance. The community reinvestment initiatives have not been spent as a fast pace as what you had anticipated. So we actually have a variance where we are spending less than what the budget was by $25 million. But overall, for year to date, we are at almost $11 million loss. Again, we anticipated that because we appropriated fund balance and expected to be operating at a loss this year. The next document is document 5. It shows revenue, and this is a graph that shows the information that was on the income statement with a little further detail. It splits it out by type of revenue. Most of these are actual to budget, fairly consistent, except for this one graph here that is other and local. This is where we budget the fund balance, and again, since it's budget dollars only and never any actuals, that gap will continue to stay there. The next report is document number 6. This shows where we are spending our Medicaid service money. It's broken into Medicaid B and C. These are general categories that are used to group the services. Overall, our total variance, we have spent $7.2 million less in Medicaid services than what we had budgeted. The numbers that I want to draw attention to are outpatient services. We have a positive variance of $6.3 million. As we go through our budget process, we identify service categories, and we knew that we would not spend all of the funds that we received. So we have about $6 million sitting in the outpatient budget that really was projected savings. And you can see that we are over budget by slightly more than $6.3 million. So if you wanted to do a true comparison of outpatient, outpatient is off to budget by, if you took $6 million out of that, it would be over by $336,000. The other area where we are having a variance is innovation services. This has continued through the year. We are $2 million over budget in innovations. This will change in the next year. Our rates were reset for beginning July 1, and the dollars have shifted among the service categories. So some of that will change in the upcoming year. Any questions? The next document is document 7. Again, this is a graph that just shows you the same information I covered. You can see that there's a gap between actual and budget for innovations, and then there's this bigger gap over here with outpatient. Same information, just in a graph rather than numbers. The next document is document 8. This is the pie chart that Donald referenced earlier. This is showing where we spend our Medicaid dollars. More than 50% are in ICFMR and innovations. The rest are spread out over the various categories. As a percentage of our whole of where we spend money, this really doesn't change much from month to month. It stays relatively consistent. Again, same information that was in the income statement, just displayed a little differently. The next document, which is document 9, is our balance sheet. And some of the things that I want to point out on here, our total assets decreased slightly from April to March. From March to April, said that backwards, sorry. They went down by $500,000. Some of that has to do with cash increasing slightly, which is a factor of a lot of different payments coming in, payments going out, and our net loss. You can see accounts receivable went down by $4.2 million. That is due to a payment that came in from the state. So changes there. The other big change is the Medicaid risk reserve. Every month we get 2% of our capitation is related to risk reserve. And so every month that cash account will increase. And you'll see in the documents a little further that there is a corresponding increase in fund balance. Make that a little bit bigger. Ooh, maybe too big. The lower half of that document shows our liabilities and fund balance. Our liabilities went up from $25.8 million to $27.4 million. That's an increase of 1.6 rounded off. Liabilities for us will vary from month to month. Some of it has to do with the timing of when we receive invoices from vendors or claims from providers and when those get paid out. Nothing significant in those changes. As the medical loss ratio increases, that means we're paying more dollars out in services, which means that usually IBNR will increase as well because they're all related. For fund balance, you can see the largest number that's here is the Medicaid risk reserve. Again, that is the corresponding increase that we had in cash. Because it is restricted money, we will see our restricted fund balance increase by the same amount as the risk reserve. The non-spendable amounts are related to accounting policies and procedures as items related to prepaids, which is an asset, and the fixed assets change, then we have to change the offsetting fund balance amount. The second page of this document continues into board committed amounts for community reinvestment. There were no changes to that. Those would only be reclassifications. The unassigned section is where you can see the impact of the current year loss offset, so you can see that we have almost $18 million coming in from non-Medicaid as a loss, and Medicaid is $7 million. When you net those two, that's where we get to our total overall loss of $10 million for the year-to-date figures. And then the last document of the routine financial reports is document 10. This is our cash flow statement, and I'm going to go down to the line that shows you net increase and decrease in cash. The column on the far right is our year-to-date column, and that shows that we are spending $15.2 million out of cash has decreased from where we were for June 30th. That will continue to decrease as the year goes to a close. Usually we will see an increase in expenses for the end of the fiscal year because of closing out the year. So again, this is the impact of spending down fund balance. And those are all the standard reports. There's questions?
Are there questions about the reports? The Finance Committee has reviewed the reports and recommends approval. If there are no questions, is there a motion to approve the reports as presented?
So moved.
So moved. This is Ira.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other questions, comments? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay.
Aye.
All right, it's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, the next item.
So the next item is that we have a revision to the current year budget, which is for fiscal year 16 and 17. Most of these changes are grouped generally into categories of either we have received some new funding, which comes through the allocation letters, or it's reclassifications of funds. So there are some reallocations through the year that occur, and I'm going to keep these at a high level. There's line item detail within the report that will explain to you the dollar amounts of where things are changing, but if you have questions, please stop me. So the first category is the other revenue. This is a decrease in Shelter Plus Care grant, the offsetting amount of expenses there. Fund balance appropriation, we increased the fund balance appropriation by $2.5 million. The majority of this money is because we had to pay out the intergovernmental transfer payment, which is the IGT payment that we've talked about. In the current year, we had to pay out $2.3 million. The remainder of the money has to do with community reinvestment initiatives being paid out, so as we start to pay them out, we appropriate over the funds. So that is $2.3 million that we had changed for the other revenue. The other categories that we have, the state money and the federal money that comes in are grouped into two categories. It's UCR, which is what we pay on a fee-for-service basis, and non-UCR is what we pay on more of a grant type of basis where we're paying a fixed amount spread over the year. It's not based on necessarily services delivered as a fee-for-service payment would be. There were some changes within those where things are moving from fee-for-service to grants and vice versa, so some of those net out to each other. The primary increases where we had state UCR dollars, we had increases in facility-based crisis, ADACS, TCLI, and three-way hospital money. Again, some of this is new allocations. In the federal UCR section, you can see that there are some numbers that offset one another. This is moving money from children allocations to adult allocations. Because children have greater coverage under Medicaid, we often end up at this point of the year where the funds are not being spent on children's services. So in order for the state to maximize how they pull down the federal funds, it's better to move those over to adult services. And so because they're not being utilized with children's services, and again, that's not a bad thing because most of them are covered by Medicaid, they get moved over into the adult services. So you can see offsetting amounts between adult and child, and it's split between mental health and substance use. The other big item, and Donald mentioned this earlier, is the CURES grants. which is $400,000. That's new money coming into the system. So those are the changes on the federal side. And again, a lot of these are money coming in and out, moving between different line items. So our total increase in revenue that we're proposing in this budget amendment is $4.1 million. Again, 2.5 of that is coming from fund balance because of appropriations. The rest is actually new real revenue coming into Vaya. The way that it is being spent is shown on the expense side. Personnel services shows a decrease. I do want to point out that for this categorization, it is not just people costs of the Vaya staff under personnel. We include professional service contracts into this. We had a reclassification from personnel services to capital outlay that has to do with the consolidation of Ridgefield, which is why you're seeing a decrease in personnel services. But this is not about staffing. This is a reclassification of a contract type. The capital outlay expenses are mostly related to our costs of the ongoing project to consolidate here into this building. We did acquire the rest of the building, and there is ongoing costs to build it out, move and close down other offices as we're moving people into this one centralized location. The total contract line represents the amount of money that we are contracting out, mostly with providers for the services. So as we get in new allocation money, we will be contracting that out. It could also be community reinvestment initiatives going into those contract line items. So expenditures equal to revenue, that is the content of this budget amendment for the last one for this fiscal year.
Okay, Finance Committee has reviewed and recommended this budget amendment be for approval. Is there a motion to approve the budget amendment as presented?
Motion.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion, questions? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Carries unanimously. Okay.
Okay, so in your package of information, I'm going to ask you to skip the next page because it is a budget amendment for the new budget, but we haven't approved the current budget, so we're going to go to the budget ordinance. The budget ordinance outlines our revenues and expenses as we've proposed in May. This does reflect our information on single stream and IGT payments from last month. This will definitely be changing in the future when those numbers are finalized. But at this point, we don't have enough information in order to process that.
So in other words, I mean, just so everybody understands this, so the chart that looked like this, our budget does not reflect that. Okay?
We have to cut 2 million more. So the budget ordinance identifies that we have total general fund revenues budget of $406,849,975 with the same amount in expenditures as shown in the budget ordinance.
Okay, are there questions or comments? Again, yes, go ahead.
I'm not gonna go as long as I did last time.
Take as much time as you want.
No.
I'll tell you what,
This is agonizing.
one of the worst things that could happen would be for one of you to come to me or one of us afterwards and say, oh, I didn't understand that, you didn't explain that way, or I'm very serious about spending whatever amount of time we need to make sure you understand as well as you can this enormous challenge.
So first I should say, as for those of you that were here, I had a lot of consternation about the budget proposal, particularly on the non-Medicaid side, the community reinvestment initiatives, those issues. I do want to commend Brian and Jennifer for working through a lot of questions that I had as they pertain to the fund balance in particular. When I started sending questions to Brian about 2 weeks ago, he had a full head of hair. So it's been rough on him. So the one thing I wanted to make sense of, Donald, with what you shared, those reductions, which were a little over $4 million. In the original budget proposal, you showed reductions of about $4.8 million from community reinvestment initiatives, and then said that we needed to identify another 4.5. So are those $4.8 million of reductions still in the budget?
Yes. Those reductions have already been made for FY '17.
This is the chart that I believe you're referring to. These were never in the original budget. When the budget was proposed in May, these amounts had already been removed. So this is the $4.8 million.
So, we can go into detail on some of this, Steve, if you want to go to individual some of the individual projects.
I'm just wanting to understand that they're still in there. So this is out of the budget.
Yes, it's gone.
Okay. And then instead of the additional 4.5, that's been slightly moderated to the 4 million that you showed us.
Yeah, what I had was a roughly around 4.5. I mean, we can't get, it's going to be, we're dealing with people and moving authorization, so it's going to be over a period of time on how quickly we can start scaling some of those services back to where we get to that 4.6 is where we need to be by the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah, and to be clear, that number at the top, the $4,578,669, that is the same number that we had in as a to be determined. The grouping categories that are on this page are almost $5 million, so not all of these have to be reduced, but the majority of these have to be reduced.
Now, one of the things that's different is the supplementation with fund balance. Okay, because that's probably the biggest change from what we showed you last month. Because we can't, we're allowed to go to the 14-15 base level, okay? But we need another, in cash, we need $4.9 million out of fund balance. That is a difference, and again, it's hard because we couldn't, change the budget that we had presented. We have to wait and do that afterwards. So we're talking about that budget, but we're also trying to reality check it with what we are about 99% sure is going to happen. And I don't know a better way to do it.
And so I'll just share with the board, one of my takeaways is the state does look at our fund balance and prefers us to have at least 8% of the total budget. And that, I really struggled with that because of the amount of risk reserve we have on the Medicaid side. I just don't like that same formula. I realize that we, as Brian has pointed out, we don't have access to the risk reserve. We don't have any control of the use of those monies, which is part of the issue. But it bothers me that we're supposed to have at least 8% of that total. And I think you said we may be allowed to go up to 15.
There was, in one of the versions of the budget, it sort of starts to blur together. We had the House, the Senate, and now this. It might have been it was in the House budget. And there's a big story behind this. This took, I'll tell you, Brian put a lot of juice in this one. We had meetings, I think we had 3 meetings scheduled with Senator Heiss, Steve Owen, who's the senior fiscal analyst for the General Assembly, Deputy Secretary. I mean, we worked to try to deal with the fundamental problem, okay, that exists, is there are no rules about our fund balance. They're other than the things that Jennifer has identified, we've been very explicit about saying, okay, we have to have this for this reason, this for that reason. Other than that, it's like a cookie jar. And that's left us vulnerable because the General Assembly just goes and grabs it and takes it. So one of the big efforts that I say, especially myself and Lisa Wainwright, worked very hard to do was to go to the state and say, look, let's just agree to some rules about, how much we should have. Because the whole point of this waiver, if you go back to when this was submitted to CMS way back when, was for there to be reinvestment. It was designed for there to be savings and for those to be reinvested. That's the beauty of this public model that's been bastardized. This money that's coming out of us doesn't go for health and human services. It doesn't have anything to do with us. It's net money that is being taken out of our system to somewhere else. So that fundamental rule has gotten broken somewhere along the way. So what I wanted to do, we wanted to do, was to say, look, we gotta have some rules about this. Because if we don't, you just keep taking the money and then there isn't gonna be any more. That's how that language got in there. Okay, which took monumental efforts. And I know you thought, well, you know, the risk reserve and that. I mean, the risk reserve, you might as well just ignore that that's even there. Never, I mean, programs have failed and they weren't allowed to use that. So you tell me what the rules are about using that. I don't know what they are. So it's almost like you gotta just, it's in a lockbox somewhere, it's a number somewhere. But without that language, we're just under attack. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. So that language went away. But the goal with that was for there to be 15%.
Some protection.
Yeah, exactly, just to make some rules about it.
And the current projection is that in 2 years, we'll be at 8% for the discretionary amount.
Right, so the qualification of the 8% being applied to the total budget was a real game changer for me. And then the trending with the fund balance, with the current demands that are being made on that. I mean, we trend down quickly and go underneath a minimum if cuts don't get worse. And I surmise they probably will. Does the state have to approve our budget that the board approves? Is there some kind of secondary endorsement? That's a topic for a future day, but we may be getting into some rarefied kind of circumstances where I might not care if we go under 8% if they're going to take it anyway. So that's just something for us to think about.
Let me respond to that, because I knew that people would start to say, well, look, let's have a party when we go out, right? Die broke, right? Die broke. Here's the one thing. What we decided, and this predates your experience with us, Steve, so it's a little bit out of phase. And this is a great topic of conversation this evening. We decided a couple of years ago that we were going to be successful at Medicaid transformation. And in order for us to do that, we're going to have to find our place in the new world of healthcare. Okay? Because we weren't going to rely on a franchise. We weren't going to necessarily rely on an RFP that was slanted and gave us this, that, or the other thing. Oh, don't get me wrong, it'd be great if they did, and they still may. And that's a great conversation to talk about. The whole effort to lead us to specialty plans. But whether that did happen or it didn't happen, my job is to create a viable future for this organization. And our best opportunity for that was to get as good as we can at complex care management, which is at the core of the specialty plans. That there is a unmistakable collection of individuals that have very significant health and behavioral health issues, and the mastery of being able to manage that population is what is all across the country. That's what people want to do, especially in the Medicaid space, that would be, for us, the best opportunity for us to have a life in the future. Otherwise, we're just, I don't know what. We're an administrative services organization. We can't capitalize on our intellectual property, in other words. So we've committed to that. And I want us to continue to keep committing to that. Now, mind you, we got to stay alive long enough for that competitive advantage that is within this organization. Okay? We have a definitive competitive advantage. Most people would just tell you that's true about Vaya, okay? But we gotta stay alive long enough to be able to do that. That costs us money, okay? That's part of that conversation again from last month, where those activities were not recognized in our rate negotiation, okay? So that's another, just as we're committing, we're not going after crisis services, we're gonna have basic services, we're not gonna move people out of their homes. As an administrative organization, we're gonna hold true to that strategic initiative to develop our expertise there. That's why we can't run ourselves to nothing.
And I get that, I would never recommend that.
And I'm not saying you are, but
Right.
that's, but that does become the question.
Right. But
You know,
even if we're being responsible and
Mhm.
maintaining at least 8%, it still doesn't mean it won't be taken. I mean, there's just, it's lawlessness with this right now. I
Mhm.
couldn't be more disappointed
It's reckless.
because, I mean, the state is doing this at a time when they have a massive surplus in the state budget. It's, I just don't understand it. So those speeches are for another day. But what pained me about the budget proposal is this board believed that these initiatives were important and made a difference and had value. And I think they've demonstrated that. And that abrupt withdrawal from that, I think is tough to process. It really is. We've had some of those programs come here and speak about that value, so that's hard to let go. But I'm going to vote to support the budget proposal, not because I like it. It's like a choice between shooting yourself in the leg with a crossbow or a pistol. I don't know which one it is. But we'll have to move on and hope for better days.
Isn't anything about it I like.
Me either.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, are you ready to vote on the budget? I know you're not, but are you ready? Okay, is there a motion to approve the budget ordinance for fiscal year 17-18?
With a lot of tears, yes.
Okay, we have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second, any more discussion?
I think we need to thank the finance department, Mr. Chairman. I think they've done a great job. I mean, I agree with Steve. I mean, it's not a good choice. There's no good choice this year. And that, with this organization, they showed a very, I mean, we're ahead of the pack. And we're gonna stay that way till we run out, till we run out, till they make us go to the half. So don't be disheartened.
Right.
We'll, this bus has always proved to be pretty, have ingenuity among others, so we'll continue to do that, but the finance department's done a great job here.
Well, and I
And
have
we'll
to
put our
say,
books
it's not
against anybody.
finance, the organization as a whole really works on this, so.
But you gotta have somebody there that knows how to add the numbers.
I'm high, I'm good.
Thank you, Ronnie, for your comments. Any other comments? We're ready to vote. All in favor of approving the budget, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Now the budget amendment.
Yes, so in the original budget that we identified last month, we had told you that the state was realigning the geriatric teams, the GERO funds, and that the counties that were not within our catchment area were going to move over to partners or other MCOs where the counties actually reside nearing Medicaid. And in the interim, the decision was made to not make that change. And so we are retaining all of the counties that we currently have today. So we will receive the full funding that we have gotten in the current year. And so 2 of our RIFs were rescinded as part of that process because our staff are the way that those services are delivered, so it's service dollars. And what this revision does is put the revenue back in and puts the money in there to pay the staff. So that is the amendment. It is for $291,181 additional dollars.
it means money coming in, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve.
We have a motion, is there a second? Okay, Pat seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of budget amendment number 1 for the 17-18 budget, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Okay. Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, before you move on, I've got to go back to Baker County. I got a meeting at 7:30, but I'm gonna say one thing before I leave.
And I've seen him drive.
I'll make it, if I can get through this list over here. But I want to tell you about Dr. Martin coming to Macon County. It took us a long time to get all our physical therapists in one room, but we did that. And Dr. Martin came over to Macon County. And if you've not met with all your physical therapists, they probably see more opiate addicted folks than anybody else in your county. And so we got all the physical therapists together. Dr. Martin came over for 2 hours and talked to these folks on how to deal with these folks, because they requested him to come over. They called me and I suggested Dr. Martin. So, you know, a group you don't think about is physical therapists. They've been to the doctor, they've had a knee replacement. Of course, they give them 40 floor tabs before they ever have surgery. You know, that's protocol. We know that. So, that's a very interesting group, very interesting discussion. Of course, they're under some rules and regulations also as physical therapists. But Dr. Martin, and I want to just put a shout out to him. And so if you ever have a group in your county that you want to put together that can tell you some very interesting stories, you get your group of physical therapists together. They probably see more addicted folks than anybody in your community. So, and we're following up with that. They're having their own group meetings, and we're following up with that. So thank you, Brian, for allowing Dr. Martin to come. And they were very, very interesting and very productive. We'll be following up on that. So thank you.
No charge for that either, Ryan.
I'll get, yeah, there'll be a charge.
Okay, at this time, we need a motion to go in closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318 and 11A1 in order to prevent disclosure of competitive health care information that's privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 122C and 126.1 or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes, or to consult with the attorneys pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318, 11A3. Is there a motion?
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
There you go.
Good to go? Okay. All right, our next item on the agenda is the Regulatory Compliance and Quality Committee report. Dr. Jack Vaughn.
Yes, I'm Billy Kennedy tonight.
All right, Billy.
Before I report, I have to define a couple of terms, a little glossary check here, and that's concern and panic. And concern is the first time you can't do it twice, and panic is the second time you can't do it once. And the reason I tell you that is because when I got this PDF from the email, and I brought it up and got ready to print it out. I usually just print it out. And it's 258 pages. And I said, well, that was concern. So I thought, well, I'll just wait until I get my packet, you know. It'll come in the mail. So sure enough, it came in the mail. And, you know, pulled my 258 pages out. Well, panic was, it was printed on both sides. And you all see it. So there we are. So we're going to go one page at a time. We have reports from our we have the best ones. I want you to know we have the best ones. On our committee. Okay. We heard with regard to contracts with specialty investigations, special investigations. We had a report from Brandy Lamb, who was instrumental in getting fraud and abuse conviction, which started several years ago, but was actually generated by Vaya, and or by Smokey at the time, and was successfully prosecuted to the court. And so there is some sweet victories sometimes. $500,000, which will be hopefully eventually repaid to Vaya. So the work they do is important, and it does work. We have a report on health records. Our current paper records, if put in a file cabinet that was just a single file cabinet, would stretch for 2 miles. That's an impressive concept. And these are still in the process of being converted, being scanned in. And I learned today that human resource records actually have to be kept longer than your personal medical records, which doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense to me, but it is a tremendous administrative burden. We met Marvin, what was his last name?
Sanders.
Marvin Sanders, who's our new head of regulatory compliance, and we had a report from Heather, Marvin came to us from the regulatory compliance on the state level, so brings much expertise with him. So this is a great opportunity. So we have a report on that. I think there's no particular areas of concern. We learned about privacy and security. We learned about our external audits and our reconsiderations. There were no areas that were total outliers that required any further follow-up. We had the annual reports from, the reason it was so long, we had quarterly reports, monthly reports, annual reports. So hopefully it won't ever be that long. We had the QM plan presented by Stevie Kazicki, and that plan will need to be approved by the board. The RCQC committee reviewed those and had no major recommendations with regard to the wording in the ideas, and we'll recommend to this full board that the plan be approved. And I guess that's in the form of a motion.
Okay. There's a motion on the floor, is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor of approving the fiscal year 17-18 compliance plan, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously, okay.
That was the QM annual plan. And then we also had the annual compliance plan presentation from Tracy. And that also was recommended for approval by the full board.
Are you making that in form of motion?
And I'm making that in form of motion.
Is somebody making that in form of a second?
Second.
Okay, Nancy. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
Unless anybody has any questions about what we do in RCQC, Arts and Culture Committee. That's all for it.
That's ROC.
All right, our next item, Consumer and Family Advisory Committee report, Pat McGinnis.
Our steering committee met on Friday morning, June the 9th here. We reviewed Vaya's balance sheet as of April 30th, the consolidated income statement and summary, and the CFAC expenditure report. We also gave reports on the March 2017 local meetings, committees, and board of directors. We also reviewed and approved a new design for a CFAC brochure, and marketing and communications is placing an order, and members will begin distributing them in the community when they arrive. We discussed preliminary options for the annual CFAC retreat, which takes place in the fall. Received a Vaya update from Brian Shipping about organizational changes and community projects. On that same day, or on June 10th, we held our annual business meeting. I think we had one meeting in the morning, one in the afternoon. Wasn't that right, Nancy?
Yes.
I've got it wrong on my report
During the
here.
morning business and the afternoon.
So we held our business meeting that afternoon and reviewed and commented on the budget. We had the gaps analysis overview, community reinvestment network development update, Vaya health update, and open questions and answers with Christina. We appreciate you being there, Christina. Thank you for coming. And we also had an update on a person-centered plan project, which some of the CFAC members have been working on. We have no meeting scheduled in July. Our local meetings will resume in August. Lenore on the 14th, Silva the 15th, Asheville the 21st, and Boone the 22nd. Thank you.
Thank you. Provider Advisory Council report, Judy Duncan.
We met yesterday, actually, and we continue to work on the goals that Vaya has set for the PAC. And actually, we have one of them that we discovered was in their QI plan this today. But we did have the IDD subcommittee had a speaker. Her name was Linda Kendall Fields. She's with the Jordan Institute, the School of Social Work at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And she did a presentation on guardianship, a guardianship project that she's working on. It was very well received. She did a great job. We are going to make the PowerPoint available to the providers through my committee that we work with, to providers who could not be there, even though we did have a pretty good show for providers. The mental health and substance use committees are continuing to try to work on increasing their membership. We, in all fairness, the IDD subcommittee has been meeting for quite a while. We already had a pretty well-established committee already. We do need CFAC representation. I think Mary Ann has been trying to find us somebody, and I think somebody was supposed to be there yesterday, but they didn't make it.
Yes, she was supposed to be there, but she was.
Oh, she was there. She attended the mental health one, though.
Yeah, but I was supposed to be there for IDD.
You were.
I was, but I was getting my MRI for my surgery, so
Well,
sorry.
that takes priority, but
Yeah.
we missed you, and it was a great speaker. I hate you missed it.
Be there next time.
And maybe we can have, have that as a repeat to
I would love
a
to.
larger number
Yeah.
of providers, and even the CFAC committee may be interested in having her come and speak. She did a tremendous job. One of the reasons the IDD subcommittees have a lot of speakers is we're trying to focus on training for them relative to different topics as that relate back then to the goals that we've had set by Vaya for network development and crisis planning, crisis development, and so on. The PAC then met in the afternoon. The whole committee's come back together. We met in the afternoon, and we really have had such full agendas. We're finding ourselves not getting to everything and have to really delay things to the next month. But we were fortunate enough to have Brian come and speak to the group about the specialty plans, and so he did a sort of a expanded but contracted presentation of what the board got last month, with some similarities and some differences based on some things that we've heard that the legislature has done in the meantime. But he did a great job on that, and I think we had a lot of questions, I thought the group came up with quite a few questions, and so that was good, and we really appreciate your time. Miss Christina, so she was doing something else yesterday, so anyway, that's our report.
Thank you. The only other thing we have on the agenda is approval of the emergency board meeting minutes from May 22nd.
Yeah.
Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion.
All right, Pat made a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Nancy, second. All in favor of approval, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye. Nancy.
No meeting. That's why I took the surgery off for a week. No meeting in July, next meeting's August.
You're all for good behavior.